This took place about 7 years ago, and it's been haunting me ever since. I've been a trucker for over a decade now, and you hear all sorts of stories on the road, but this one, it still gives me the chills. So I was driving through a particularly desolate stretch of highway in the Midwest when I decided to pull over at a truck stop for the night. The place was pretty run down, and there was only a few other trucks parked there. As I was getting ready to settle in, I overheard a couple of guys talking near one of the trucks. They seemed on edge, whispering urgently. I caught snippets of their conversation and heard one of them say, "Watch out for the lizards." I thought that was a weird thing to say, but I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured that it was some sort of local slang or an inside joke. As the night wore on, though, I started to drift off, but then I heard footsteps crunching on the gravel outside. It was strange too, because it didn't sound just like one person. It was like a small group was walking around, but the pattern was irregular and unsettling to say the least. Curiosity got the better of me eventually, so I peeked out of my window. I couldn't see much in the dim light, but there were definitely figures moving around the parking area. They seemed to be skulking between the trucks, almost like they were looking for something. I told myself that it was probably just other drivers stretching their legs, but for whatever reason the unease just wouldn't go away. Suddenly, though, I heard a sharp knock on my door. My heart leapt into my throat at that. I glanced at the clock, and it was well past midnight. I called out, asking who it was, but there was no response, just the sound of footsteps shuffling away. I was too spooked to investigate further, so I locked my doors and I just tried to get some sleep. Now, just as I was drifting off again, I heard a low, sort of hissing sound coming from somewhere nearby. It was faint but persistent, like somebody whispering just out of earshot. I squeezed my eyes shut and told myself that it was just my imagination, but then I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. Throughout the night, I could hear knocks and scratches on the other trucks around me as well. Every once in a while, there was some sort of yelling or moaning coming from the distance, like someone or something was trying to communicate or call out. Occasionally, there was a smoky smell too, like a cigarette would waft through the air when these things or whoever was out there were close to my truck. The rest of the night was a blur of eerie sounds and, well, creeping dread. I kept telling myself that it was just some weird local prank, but I don't know about that anymore. The whole thing felt very off. As soon as the first light of dawn broke, I didn't waste a second. I fired up my truck and I got out of there without even looking back. I did not want to see what might have been left in the morning, and to this day, I just cannot shake the feeling that there was something more to those lizards than meets the eye. Who knows, maybe it was just an overactive imagination. Or maybe there's something out there in those backwood truck stops that we're just better off not knowing about. Whatever the case, stay safe out there and keep your eyes and ears open, because you just never know who or what might be lurking in the dark out there. This happened about 13 years ago. I was in my early 20s at the time. So, to preface this, while growing up, my sister and I had many encounters that you could consider supernatural, I suppose, her more so than me. She seemed to be harassed by spirits often, and sometimes I shared some of those encounters too. Now, several years ago, after moving out of home, I went to visit my family and we were staying the night at my grandparents' place. It was a normal day, nothing out of the ordinary. I went to bed that night, my sister and I sleeping in different rooms. I dreamt I was laying in bed, a different bed in the dream, no recollection of what the room looked like, when suddenly an intense feeling of despair just washed over me. But it was worse than that. Every positive feeling in the world was erased, and I was left with this overwhelming pressure of all the negativity, and I started crying. I rarely cry, and as hilarious as this example might be, think of the effect the Dementors from Harry Potter have on people. In the dream, I rolled over and a red dome had encased the bed, and a black hooded figure stood at the end of the bed holding a scroll in his hand. At this point, I lost it and started screaming in fear. I screamed so loud that the red dome split open as I woke myself up from my own screams. My stepdad came into the room and asked if that was me making the noise. I just mumbled, "Yeah, I think so." Eventually, I went back to sleep, and that was that for the night. Now, the next morning, I went to tell my sister about my dream, and she said, "Before you tell me that, I need to tell you something that happened to me last night. You see, I couldn't get to sleep, and suddenly I noticed a person standing at the end of the bed holding a piece of paper in their hand." At that, I was terrified, too scared to sleep for the next few nights, but nothing else ever happened like that since then, which is strange, right? It definitely put me on edge for a while, but thankfully, nothing else happened. It was a random day, and my family and I had a trip planned out to go somewhere far from home. It was to go to a place in the Philippines, and while on the way, we used a GPS tracker to reach our destination. None of us were aware that the GPS may not be actually accurate, but we followed the route anyway. My uncle was driving the car that day. It was a fortune car, big enough to fit many people inside. As we were making our way there, it was still sunset, and we were going up a hill surrounded by tall trees. Eventually, I must have fallen asleep for a while because I was pretty exhausted from all the journey that we went through to just get here. But I soon woke up to my mother's voice saying, "Be careful, we're going to fall off." I looked around the car window, and we were on top of a hill now. The sides of the road were so thin and tight. One wrong turn and we would all come crashing down. My cousins and I were at the back of the car. We stayed quiet because we knew that to panic in a situation like this was going to be very unhelpful. My mum was the only one panicking, and as we went further, my uncle drove slowly, and thankfully we didn't fall off and managed to find an area that we could turn and make a U-turn. It was still on the hill, mind you, but the area was wide enough now. After making it back to the main road safely, we were all pretty shaken, scared even. Now fast forward a bit. After that it was nighttime, obviously. There was nothing in sight, no lights, and it was just pretty much blackness and nothingness all around us. My family, they didn't follow the GPS this time. They used their memories because they'd used a different road before, apparently. We were going up a hill again, and I had no idea where it was, but all I saw were trees around the car and the quiet sounds of the car wheels driving over the gravel. Then at some point we stopped, and I was confused by that, but it appeared that there was no continuation of the road ahead. Everyone in the car was quiet now. My mother asked my uncle to check outside. When they opened the car door, it was really cold. The wind was strong, and I heard the trees. It was really spooky, and it sent a bit of a chill down my spine. My uncle closed the door as he turned on the front lights of the car, and there, all of a sudden, was a line of people, lots of them. I don't have any idea what they were doing alone in the woods there, and it was so weird. We quickly backed out of there, and we made our way back home after that. After that too, I fell asleep from exhaustion, I think. I hadn't eaten all day because we were stranded in the woods, and the next thing I know, I woke up and we were already on the main road and stopped by a 7-Eleven shop. They bought some hot dogs for my cousin and I to eat. All of us were starving and had no energy at this stage. I'm glad my family and I were safe, but I guess it's just a reminder that if you want to go somewhere, don't always trust the GPS or the maps because routes are definitely outdated at times, and in our case, that was definitely what happened. Still though, what those people were doing up at that mountain, in the cold like that, out in the dark with no light, I have no idea. I was 20 at the time, home alone at my family's rural house with one of my high school buddies who lived with us at the time. He was 18 and, importantly, there were no cars in the driveway, so the house appeared to be unoccupied. Now, my buddy is short, skinny, baby-faced, and eternally looks like a middle schooler, but he's a grown man who can hold his own in a fight. A lifted, grey Julie quad cab with a spot of white primer where a company logo would have been pulls into our driveway. I don't recognize it, or anyone in it. They stop and 3 dudes hop out of the truck. The driver has a semi-automatic in a holster on his hip too. They had to drive past our no soliciting, no trespassing sign, violators may be shot, to get where they were at. I'm observing this through the crack in the blinds in the living room window. My buddy was around back pretending to be a blacksmith with our homemade charcoal forge. He came around the side of the house while I was observing. I couldn't hear, but I could see body language. I noticed my buddy was holding the hammer in a very specific way so that he could whip it around his shoulder and throw it like Thor if he needed to. This told me that my buddy also had no idea who these people were. At that, I grabbed his deer rifle off of the living room coffee table. Silly place to store a gun, I know, but that's where it was. Slammed a single round into the chamber and aimed through the slit in the blinds at the armed trespasser. Jumping now to my buddy's perspective, here's how their conversation went. Hey there, kid. Are your parents home? We're some local ranchers going door to door selling fresh cuts. Yeah. My dad's inside getting ready to go shooting. He's got plenty of meat, but my uncle might want some. Let me call him. To which my buddy pulled out his phone and called 911. After a moment, the trespassers realized the cops were coming and got back in their truck, and they left pretty quickly. I found out later that the truck was actually stolen, and we had a run-in with the group that was responsible for over 30 break-ins over the past few months, some of them pretty violent. I just woke up in the middle of the night remembering this, and I need to get it off my chest. So when I was 16, my dad, brothers, and I lived in an old rundown house pretty much in the middle of nowhere. It was a private rental. My brother would do work for the landlord to pay our rent. Our landlord never came off as particularly creepy or anything, but that could be because I rarely went outside when he came over to talk to my dad, and he wouldn't dare do anything in front of my dad. But anyway, I was home alone one day, and my dad and brothers went out. Somewhere, I really don't remember where, but I had my dog in a fenced-in yard outside, but that was it. I was in my room doing whatever I was doing, probably playing The Sims 2 at the time. We lived in the middle of nowhere, like I said, and there was a long driveway which the window of my bedroom directly faced. I could see or hear anyone driving up the driveway at any point. I saw a car, but not my dad's, and immediately began to get a bit freaked out. I ran and shut all the blinds in the house, turned off all the lights and checked the doors were locked. But it was our landlord. He lived next door, about 2 miles away from our house, and yes, that was the closest house. This wasn't the first time that he'd come here unexpectedly. It had happened twice before, and both times I was home alone. Those first 2 times, he was only there for about 10 minutes, walking around the outside of the house and then quickly leaving. But this time was different. I could sense that something was wrong, so I grabbed a big kitchen knife and hid under the kitchen table. I heard him pull up outside and open our front gate. My dog outside was going ballistic and barking. I heard him yell, "Shut up, mutt." I could hear his footsteps walking up to the door. He tried to open the door and I was freaking out. At this point, I texted my dad too. He was coming straight home, but they'd be like an hour still. He continued to walk around the outside of our house, trying to peek into each window. The house is old and has 3 doors that you can enter from the outside from. He tried to open all 3. I thought that maybe he didn't know I was home. Maybe the last 2 times were a coincidence, but he started saying things, including calling out my name, which means that he knew that I was home alone. I couldn't hear what else he was saying through the double brick walls, but I quietly creeped through the house, following his voice up and down the hallway. I was trying to hear what he was saying, and that's when he said something that I'll never forget. "I'm going to burn the house down, but I'll let you out first." Of course, I didn't take him seriously, which scares me even more now that I think about it. But he wanted me to come out. He wanted me to take his threat seriously. And that's the part that really gets to me. I know exactly what could have happened if I had believed him, and my life would have been, well, completely different. He was there for at least 30 minutes too, maybe closer to an hour in fact. And I mean, he was very persistent. He left before my dad came home, and I told him everything, and we moved out soon after this. I still don't know how he knew that I was home alone too. My dad never saw him on the way driving out, so he knew my dad was gone because there was no car in the driveway, but how did he know that I wasn't with him? The whole thing was creepy, and in fact, I'm just realizing now that I think we were evicted in the end. We didn't leave. We lived in a caravan at my uncle's house for a year before finding a house in a different town in the end, and to be honest, I was happier to be there in that caravan than in that house. This is by far the weirdest thing that has ever happened to me, and genuinely I have no idea what to think about it. So 14 years ago, a group of friends and I were hanging outside and eating pizza on top of our friend's car when we all saw what looked like a monkey swinging high in the trees a good distance away. We lived in GA, and I joked that one of the apes from the local zoo must have escaped, but there was definitely an uneasy feeling amongst us. Everything was quiet too, and on this warm GA day, we live in an area with a lot of water. There's lots of insects, but everything just felt quiet and still all of a sudden. The ape then stopped swinging from the trees, and even though it was really large, a black figure, we could just tell that it was sort of looking at us. Then the ape started straightening its posture, looking more human and less like a primate. It was unsettling to say the least. We all just stood there sort of frozen and watching. Suddenly the man seemed to turn around and crouch down, but as he was crouching down, his shoulder blades were getting impossibly larger, growing over his head before huge wings sort of sprang from its back out of nowhere, and it jumped off the branch and flew off. Even from a distance, we could tell that this thing was absolutely huge too. At that moment, it was like the spell that we were under broke, and we all scrambled to get back into the car, screaming. I didn't sleep that night. I felt like whatever it was had followed me home and was watching all night. I'm sure that it probably wasn't, but I was terrified. Honestly, too, I definitely wouldn't have believed it if 3 other people hadn't have seen it also that night. And it's just one of the weirdest things that's ever happened to me, and something I'll never forget. I've had quite a few weird and paranormal experiences in my life, but that one is by far one of the most terrifying, weird, and memorable ones yet. So I moved into this house with my family, mum, dad, 2 sisters, 2 dogs, about 8 years ago. I was 10 at the time, and my sisters were 12 and 15. Some of my neighbors' kids went to our school too, and were in the same grade as my 12-year-old sister at the time. Trigger warning here, but they told us that the son of the family who lived here before us had actually ended his own life in our garage. As a kid, I very much believed that too. They even went as far as to say that that's why the handprints are there, which always freaked me out because on our garage door, there is a set of handprints on the side that just never seem to come off. Anyway, fast forward a few years later, my dad planted some purple tulips in the front for my mum because she has epilepsy and that's the representative color. She had always mentioned how she felt bad replacing the yellow ones that were there previously for the son. I had no idea that it had any sort of significance until she would always say that The story was just so tragic, and she could only tell us everything when we were older. She always got a little bit choked up talking about it too. Over the years, weird things had started happening though. I would hear footsteps when I was home alone with my dogs beside me. My dogs will randomly begin barking into my sister's room, which used to belong to the son apparently. The dogs refused to go into that room at times. I would hear knocks on my door, but nobody was there. My hangers were all flipped up in the closet at one point, and one even started moving on its own with no fans on or anything. Something about my sister's room had always freaked me out too, and my sister had even said that she purposely falls asleep in mine or my other sister's room because that room terrifies her. It was in the basement. She even said that while away at college or anywhere else she was fine, but something about that room gives her sleep paralysis, and the only way that she can describe it is like the Babadook hiding in the corner watching her. Could this just be a ton of weird coincidences, or is there actually something here? My dad has 2 short paranormal experiences from when he was around 20 years old and living with friends in a haunted flat that is now long demolished that have always freaked me out. He lived with 4 friends in the late 70s, early 80s, and were into the punk rock scene at the time, nights in the pub and all that. I do wonder if the stories could be related to drugs, but he insisted that he never took them personally. Now, one night, a girlfriend of one of the roomies was staying in the flat alone whilst the rest went to the pub, and later that night, she came crying into the pub to find them saying that there were voices coming from inside the flat with her. This was the first hint that something creepy was happening in that flat, and his standout story, however, is pretty brief, but he was sleeping on the sofa one night, woke up and saw a person with no eyes leaning over the back of the sofa looking down at him. He said that he was frozen in fear and it disappeared after a few seconds. It wasn't his roommates and he didn't recognize the person at all. His other experience was when he was younger, around 15, when he was living at my grandparents' house, and this story has always got to me. So one night, when my grandparents or his parents were out, he walked out of the front room to go upstairs to go to the toilet, and he swears that he saw a naked man, wet skin with no arms, long damp black hair, down below the shoulder level, stood at the top of the stairs in the light looking down before just disappearing. He never told his parents this because he didn't want to scare them, but he told me a few years ago when I told him about some of my minor experiences. I have visited that house a few times since my dad told me the story, and when I stand at the bottom of those stairs and look up, I can't help but feel a scary chill run down my spine, imagining what my dad saw when he was young. He hasn't seen anything since then and is now almost 70, I think. He's definitely not one to make up stories, and his other roommates also had experiences in that flat too, though minor compared to what he experienced. I struggle to recall some of the other stories, but to be honest, my dad's ones are definitely the ones that stand out the most. I live alone with my mum in a relatively nice area, in a section of the house our friend owns. I have some anxiety issues from a stalking incident in a prior area of town, so sometimes paranoia gets the best of me, but I'm able to use logic to reason my way out of it 99.9% of the time. Now, our friend frequently travels, and my mum has had health issues recently. Every person who lives here has to go outside and go through storm doors to the basement to access the laundry, and we have motion sensors through the basement and yard to help us see as we're walking. My front door, it has a small window with a broken blind or two, so there's small peepholes. And this just happened about an hour ago, and honestly, I'm still a bit shaken by the whole thing. So our housemate is traveling, and my mum felt ill enough earlier that I told her to go to an emergency room and make sure nothing serious was happening, and I was left by myself, which isn't too uncommon here. I'd been doing my normal routines when I remembered that there was laundry in the dryer, so I got up and walked down my steps into the basement, and I had left the storm doors open. Now is where you'd think that the story would start, but surprisingly my laundry routine went fine. I closed the storm doors and proceeded back up to the stairs to my section of the home. I had to pee really bad, so the second that I closed the door, I placed the bin down and had the thought to lock my door tonight. Something I don't tend to do, in fact, because my mum is a smoker and hearing the locks at night, well, it's pretty loud and it'll wake me up a lot. But anyway, if I hadn't, that could have been a huge mistake that night. I used the bathroom and ended up taking a bit longer than I needed to, scrolling around social media. I remember all the clean clothes, so I stripped mostly naked besides underwear, and I throw on a pair of shorts, and as I grab a shirt to throw on, my heart, brain, gut, and everything all of a sudden just screams, "Door, now, locks." In that second, thankfully my body responded and took the 2 steps towards the door. I tried to lock it, but the doorknob wouldn't move. That only ever happens if the knob is being turned, and I know for a fact that I wasn't turning it. I locked the secondary lock and slammed my back into the door, waiting for a minute to test the doorknob lock again, hoping that it would work this time. Thankfully, this time it did, and while I hadn't noticed at first, the motion sensor light had activated far too long after I was inside for me to have done it. And I mean, they're such terrible lights, I have to wave my hands in front of them occasionally to activate them, so I'm like 95% sure that somebody was out there that night. I sat with my back to the door for who knows how long before I got up and turned most of the lights off, grabbed a knife that I had next to me all night. I looked out both windows that faced that direction after a while, and I saw nothing, luckily I guess, because honestly, I don't know what I would have done if I had seen someone. I really don't know what to do about all of this, but I am almost certain that there was someone there that night, someone with bad intentions. Two nights back, I had an experience with something in the wooded areas around the Maple Lake in Illinois at the Overlook. I tried to do my research on what it could have been. I came across encounters of other cryptids like skinwalkers and wendigo. However, the suburban nature of this encounter has led me to disqualify the possibility of it being either one of those creatures, and its appearance and location has led me to believe that it may be what is regarded as a crawler. I don't know what it was, but it was something that felt human. But I know it couldn't have been a human. It felt too much like an animal. It still hit me like I was being watched by an animal too. It just took longer for me to catch on than I usually do, I suppose. Anyway, so I'm there off the main streets in the southwestern suburbs at the Overlook, listening to music in my car. I often like to get out of the city just to clear my head, and I feel like I heard something pulling up to me from behind. You know it's late, it's dark, people like to come to the Overlook to drink or find some privacy, so I check my rearview mirror, and that's when I see it, in the moonlight. Something is in the shadows across the road up the hill. I'm unsure of exactly what it is. I move to adjust my mirror to get a better look when I see eyes like how animals have eyes that glisten in the dark. It's like that, but they're watching me through the rearview mirror, transfixed, focused, intent like the way people do in photographs. It looked like what I now imagine is the devil of some kind, tall and white as snow. It froze me in place. It had straightforward eyes like predators do. That's all I got to look at as it was slinked up against and behind the trees. My head, I guess, finally processed what I was seeing, and I get hit, like someone poured ice down my back. That feeling I get when someone is approaching me from behind or something is watching me. This sends me absolutely bugging out into panic, so I shift into drive and hook a right forward, and out of the lot, back onto the main road. Running along the hill, I speed up and head forward. I just drive until I hit the main road with streetlights again, and I don't stop until I get back out of the surrounding preserves area. The eyes, they just felt so human though, but it felt impossible for someone to be out there, but I know it just couldn't have been an animal because when I'm out in the preserves, it never felt like that when I was among deer or the other animals that I know are out there. Whatever it was, it felt wrong, like it was invading the space, but it didn't feel like a person exactly, like the feeling you get when a person is around that you sort of know. I keep my guard up pretty well when I'm out alone, but whatever it was, it flew beneath my senses and fit into the dark pretty quickly. Again, I don't know what it was, but it made me feel so sick that I was there and I missed it. Like I didn't know it was there until I fully registered something was out there with me. If anyone has any idea as to what it could have been, then please do give me a better understanding. I'm willing to talk or listen. I've been a skeptic as long as I've run in circles amongst my fellow outdoors people. But this encounter, it has quickly turned my perception of the natural and unnatural upside down. This happened about 15 years ago at a ranch-style house in the middle of the country, surrounded by farmland and sparsely spaced houses. I haven't talked to my dad in years, and while he claimed to be religious, he more so thought that he was than him actually being religious. I've been a very headstrong skeptic, was a typical teenage atheist, and still am an atheist, I suppose, but have become more spiritual in my late 20s and 30s, or at least open to it, I guess. So my dad and I were home, and he was in his office room with the radio very loud, and I was in the living room working on college work. My dad, he can't hear very well, at all. However, we both heard the kitchen door open with a pop and sort of squeaking kind of sound, which was the typical sound when opened. Work boots stomping on the kitchen floor. We all wore work boots because we were outside laborers and walked heavy, and the sound of both the work boots being taken off and being dropped on the kitchen floor, which is what we, my dad, little brother and I, did, and a very common noise. My dad and I both heard it and figured it was my little brother coming home. However, the outside free-roaming dogs hadn't barked and the driveway alarms didn't go off. Maybe the dogs were out roaming, or maybe the driveway just didn't pick up the car. That's how we tried to rationalize it anyway. So I called my little brother, and he was 45 minutes away still. My dad and I searched outside the entire house, ground floor and basement, every room, and it was just us. Like I said, I'm not religious, but something just isn't right about that house, like at all. And a decade plus later, my little brother still swears that it wasn't him. He has story about seeing shadow people for years, and something following him on and in his car as well, and many, many more stories. But my eyes water and I get goosebumps every time that I share this, even all these years later. Many, many weird or questionable things happened in that house too. My older sister swears that she saw what she thought was my little brother when he was just a toddler, but it turns out that it was like a light figure. Something during the middle of the night when she got up to, she thought that she saw my little brother in the hallway by the bathroom at one point. It wasn't my little brother though. She locked herself in the bathroom and wouldn't come out until someone woke up and knocked on the door. This was like 20 plus years ago, and eventually she got older and she wouldn't talk about it anymore. But for the longest time, when asked about the story, she would always say the exact same thing. And again, when I share this, I have to admit that it's a little creepy. When I was about 6 years old, I stayed at my grandmother's quite frequently. She lived in a mobile home, or a trailer I guess you could call it, and the washroom and living room were on opposite sides of the trailer. Now one day, I walked to the end of the hallway to use the washroom, and when I looked inside to find the light switch and turn it on, I saw my cousin, who sometimes visits my grandma, look me directly in the eye and put a finger up to her lips like a shush sound, but she was completely silent. She then got on her hands and knees and crawled behind the counter and out of sight. I felt a feeling of dread and instantly knew that this wasn't my cousin, or even a human being for that matter. I took off running and screaming for my grandma. We searched the entire trailer together, but it was only us in there. While we searched, I told her that I had seen my cousin in there, and she told me not to be silly. My cousin is not visiting town and she's home, which is a couple of hours' drive away. To this day, I don't know what I saw or why I saw it or why it made the shush gesture, but the whole thing, it has sat with me all these years later. So last night on the baby monitor, I saw a hand gently patting my 4-month-old son's belly when he was crying to console him. This isn't the first time too. We don't have squatters, we don't have attic access to any of the bedrooms, we have 2 dogs and we both work from home. We would know if somebody else was secretly living with us, but anyway, back towards the end of May, my son was taking a nap in his bassinet in our room. He's just a baby, so he naps frequently throughout the day. This was probably about 5 p.m, I would guess. My wife and I were on the deck outside grilling and had the baby monitor out with us. He was starting to wake up and was fussing a bit, so she went inside to go to the bathroom before getting him upstairs. I was bringing food inside as she was walking out of the bathroom, and when she saw me, she stopped dead in her tracks, like she was absolutely shocked to see me. I jokingly said, "I live here too, you know." And that's when she told me that she just saw a hand on the baby upstairs a second ago when looking at the monitor. In a sudden panic when she realized that it wasn't me upstairs, we rushed up and didn't find anything or anyone in the room. When she told me, it's not that I didn't believe her, I guess. I was just trying over and over again to think of a logical explanation for what she saw. But nothing just ever made any sense. Now, my first thought from an outsider's view would be, oh, this is common and it's just a glitch showing a previous image on the screen or something. But this baby camera and monitor is just for a live feed. There's no recording or on-cam memory or anything like that. The image is very clear and doesn't have visual effects or anything. If it is out of range, it just goes to a white screen stating the signal has been lost. It doesn't drop bitrate or get blurry or anything like that. I also am a videographer for a living, so I'm quite familiar with the concept of the artifacts or occasional compression glitch showing old footage that you would see on security cams that has onboard memory. But I can assure you that this was not that. In the 4 years of owning and using these cameras for our 2 kids, that has never happened too. Anyway, fast forward to last night, about a month and a half after that first occurrence. Our son now usually sleeps in his crib in his room until he wakes up for a feeding in the middle of the night. Last night at 3 a.m. on the dot, I heard him crying on the monitor right on my nightstand. I went to nudge my wife to bring him in, but she wasn't in bed. As I rolled back over to look at the monitor, I saw a hand come into frame from the side, gently pat him as he was crying for 2 soft pats on the belly, then leave the frame. I didn't think twice. I figured it was obviously my wife and she was maybe prepping the changing table to change his diaper or something, which is why she had patted him instead of picking him up right away. But that was when my wife came out of the bathroom in our bedroom, confirming that she was not in his room across the house. I immediately stood up and said, "Oh my goodness, I thought it was you," as the adrenaline was rushing my body. I could barely speak, in fact. It's true when people say that when something happens like this that they froze or couldn't speak or whatever. I was just completely choked up and had a hard time explaining what I meant. Again, we both went into his room and, as far as we could tell, he was alone. Now, what I don't get is, if this is a ghost or a spirit or whatever, why is it making itself seen? We have 2 cameras in the room, his baby monitor and a blink camera on a shelf that we use just for live viewing, so we can't access previous cloud storage that only triggers with motion. 2 separate occasions of being seen, I feel like it goes against all of the stories that you would hear about spirits and cameras. Not an orb, not a light, but truly a physical hand. This spirit is seemingly friendly, I guess, because otherwise I feel like it wouldn't try to comfort our baby. Anyway, has anyone experienced anything like this before? I'm trying not to overreact and take this experience as a guardian angel looking over our baby, but I'm not so sure about that, and I would really, really appreciate some help. My ex and I were walking on a trail near my house one day, and around my area, homeless people are known to frequent. Everything was pretty much par for the course, until I walked off the path and onto what seemed to be a deer trail. On it, I saw a few deer at first, but later I heard what at first seemed to be voices. I assumed that maybe a homeless community camped there or something, but we came across a deer which lowered its head and crown of antlers and continued walking toward us until it was maybe about 10 feet away and then disappeared into the forest. Okay, so maybe the deer was sick or had a wasting disease or something. Still, strange behavior for a wild animal. I kept hearing the voices until I realized that it was actually chanting. Chanting at too low of a volume to register what the words were. And the deeper we walked down that deer trail, I realized that it couldn't be the homeless as the chanting repeated itself. It was sort of on a loop almost. Like the sounds were repeating, even if the words themselves weren't audible. And finally, we came to what appeared to be a concrete tunnel at the end of the trail, and I had this odd feeling that if we didn't leave now, that we were about to die. Not dread, but like terror. So, we ran from that place, and while the looped chanting followed us down the trail, all while I felt like we were being watched. What I mean by that is that the sound of the chanting, it didn't grow fainter from behind us as we ran, and it sort of stayed the same volume, as if whatever it was following us. Also, I didn't know this at the time, but later my ex told me that people apparently went missing there and some had even died there. I heard rumors throughout my life to avoid deer trails here, but I never thought that there was anything to it. I am still perplexed, and I don't know what actually happened that night. When I was a kid, I lived in a house with my cousins until we eventually moved out. I had lived there until I was about 12, and I had a variety of experiences there. I know that they were real too because my family has had similar experiences. My first encounter? Well, it was while I was watching TV in my room. Suddenly, the dresser in the hallway began making really loud banging noises. I unfortunately can't share images right now as I'm out of country, but it was wooden and had large metal hoops to open the drawers in it. The sound was made by the metal hoops slamming against the wood. I could see them moving from where I was laying. Every time I would get up to look at it closer though, it would always stop. Obviously, I was freaked out, and after a while of this pattern, it stopped and I just continued watching TV. It couldn't have been my sibling or a cousin messing around with me too, as my family was out and my cousins were visiting family out of state. The second thing though that I can remember was constantly hearing voices. They would always be in my mother's voice too, calling out either mine or siblings' names. It always happened when I was home alone, and once I went downstairs thinking my parents had come home, but there was no one. The only thing out of place was a teacup sitting on the table in the living room. The teacup brings to me another thing that happened once before as well. Nearly every night, I would hear cups sort of tinkering around together. I could tell it was the teacups too, since it made a sort of specific higher pitched sound that other cups wouldn't. I would go downstairs after hearing it sometimes, but nothing looked different. This final one was the last large experience that I had, and it occurred a few months after my grandfather's passing. so sometimes I would sleep in his room as we were very close and it was comforting. And one night, while I was drifting off, the cabinets in the room that would hold his medication, they began violently slamming and banging. But then, I saw a figure in the hallway, hunched over and convulsing. This image is literally burned into my memory from how horrific it was to a 9-year-old. In the end, too, I just sort of covered my head in the blankets and eventually I must have fallen asleep. The next morning, I asked my parents about it, and they said that they had heard the cabinets too, but they didn't see anything in the hallway like I had. So, those are the stories that I can recall for now, and I'll probably share some more another time, but yeah, that house, there's something wrong with it, and I'm glad that I don't live there anymore. So my coworker came into work today and told me about her night. She was in bed and both her and her significant other smelled burning and heard crackling around 2 a.m. They both got out of bed to check it out. They figured it was the bug zapper outside. They went to turn it off and exited to the porch where they both heard a consistent bark from the field below. This field had no nearby houses or anything, and it's a bit of a trek to even get up their driveway. The bark was weird, but sounded like a normal dog aside from the fact that it was just consistent, almost rhythmic in fact. They decided to go ahead and check out the field. They took her car down, and as soon as the engine was cut, there was a pit all of a sudden in their stomachs. Exiting the car, it sounded like the bark was so far away now that even though they were right on top of it before, it just made no sense. It hadn't have seemed to have changed much, but it didn't sound as close as it did when they were in the house. My coworker decided that it wasn't a good idea to leave her child alone in the house for too long, and so in the end she went back. About a half an hour passed, and the dog is still consistently barking in the field. Significant other decides to go back and make sure that there isn't a dog in the ditch or something. She decided to call him so he wasn't just out there completely alone. Once he got back there, he started walking into the field trying to find it, the pit still in his stomach the whole time. He decided not to call out, but to just look instead. He left strapped just in case as well, by the way. The entire time my coworker listened on the phone. The barking grew more intense and the dog went crazy as it had obviously seen the light from his phone or something. The weirdest thing though was that he saw nothing, but the barking continued to grow louder until he must have been right on top of it. She had commented at one point that it was so deafening it sounded like the dog itself was holding the phone. But then, all of a sudden, just dead silence. No running, no barking, no breathing, nothing. No dog found or anything. She messaged her father who lives close by, and he had heard the barking too, but obviously didn't go to investigate. She had her father ask the person who owns the property to go and check out where they had heard what was going on too the next day. Nothing found so far, and it's been raining there, so there should be tracks. And I also decided to ask them if it sounded like a fox or a coyote or anything. They lived down there long enough to distinguish between the two, and this sounded too much like a bloodhound to be anything else. So if you guys have any more ideas, then I would love to hear them. For reference, we're in Ohio, so we're in Appalachia, and I know the place has a bit of a bad reputation for stuff like this, but yeah, I hope that's helpful. So my boyfriend and I live in a small neighborhood. Our house faces a densely wooded riverfront. Our street isn't very busy. It's dark and there isn't a park in the woods or anything, so not many people go down there, much less the middle of the night. But last night at around midnight, my boyfriend was sitting on our front porch smoking a cigarette when he heard a weird voice in the distance. It was clearly speaking a different language, and the only way that he could describe it was it sounded like Mickey Mouse. He thought that it was just some kids messing around with him, but as he listened closely, he noticed that it was just one voice talking and laughing. It wasn't talking to anyone except itself, whatever or whoever it was. It was far enough off in the distance that my boyfriend felt comfortable listening, until it started whistling an eerie song that he couldn't place, and as it whistled, it began to grow closer. He ran inside and locked all the doors and the windows. He tried waking me up, but I get up at like 5 a.m. every morning for work and I sleep like a rock. Hearing about it though, when I woke up to get a drink of water, really gave me the heebie-jeebies. My first thought was maybe some crackhead tweaking out in the woods perhaps, but of course my brain immediately goes to cryptids. I can't help it. But what do you think? I've been combing the internet for hours this morning, trying to find out legends and myths about this, but I haven't had much luck, so if you know anything, then please do give me some ideas. So I was alone once on a Friday evening during summer in my house around maybe 2013 to 2016. I really don't remember the exact year, but I was still in my early teens at this time as well. And anyways, usually on Fridays, I would go with my parents along with my sister to help them out at their workplace. But well, this Friday, they went only with my sister and I was left alone that day at the house. I was playing Minecraft on my old PC inside my bedroom with my headset on when suddenly I hear footsteps, like someone was rubbing their feet against the carpet in the living room, which is right next to my bedroom. I had the volume really low, so I heard it loud and clear, even through my headphones. I turn my head and look at my door, puzzled and thinking if my parents had come back to get something, or maybe my bigger brother had come to the house to grab stuff. I get up from my chair and open my door, but I don't see anyone. The lights are on in the living room, but nobody is there. I go to the front door and the back door. Both are locked. The windows are locked too. I check the driveway and the front gate, and they're closed with no cars there. I end up going to every room and turn on the lights and check every corner, even the closet, but there was nothing. Nothing had been moved or changed. So I go to call my mum and ask her if she had been inside the house. She said no, that they were already at work, and suggested that it might have been my brother, but I told her that he hadn't been here either, and I didn't hear a car pull up or anything, so she just says that I was probably just hearing things and just to make sure everything is locked. I hang up and triple check everything is locked, and walk back to my room, absolutely creeped out now. I lock the bedroom door and leave the lights on in my room. I definitely turned up the headphones volume too after that and continued to play, albeit creeped out, till my parents came back from work. To this day, it still really creeps me out thinking about it, especially because that house and property in general has had a history of paranormal activity on it. All of my family, even my skeptic brother and dad, have seen or heard things at least. Even my brother's ex-girlfriend has said that she would see or hear things in the house and in the back garage as well. We still live there, but since blessing the house, most of the activity seems to have gone away, which I'm thankful for, but still, this house still has me on edge sometimes, and I don't like that. In 2019, I was 25 and struggling financially. I asked my mum if I could take one of her rooms in order to pay less rent. I moved in, and then soon after I asked my girlfriend to move in with me to help pay rent. It was a 4-bedroom house with a studio attached in the back with a small family. On one half of our house was my mum in the master bedroom with one of my twin sisters, Carla, who was 13. It was a 4-bedroom house with a studio attached in the back with a small family. On one half of our house was my mother in the master bedroom with one of my twin sisters, Carla, who was 13. In the other room was a man who was renting a room. On the other half of the home was my sister, Janet, 19, with her baby daughter, and my other twin sister, Angela, 13. And finally, myself and my girlfriend, Kylie. Myself and my girlfriend, aside from some wine or mixed drinks on rare occasions, are completely sober. We're the type to just stay home and watch movies, really. My Catholic family was fairly poor growing up, and so I like to think of ourselves as just regular hardworking people. Most importantly, though, we like to think of ourselves as rational. We don't really deal with much nonsense. No previous strange occurrences in any of our lives, and my girlfriend is also a Christian. Now, one night at around 8 p.m., myself and my girlfriend were in bed, and we were alarmed to hear the most heavy footsteps that you could imagine on the roof. It sounded like a big man with big boots, and it was very clearly going from corner to corner above our room. I got up and went to investigate, but when I did, everything was normal in our house. I went outside expecting to see somebody on our roof, probably the back neighbors, but there was nothing. We asked the people in the back, but they had no clue. Me and my girlfriend and our cat were the only ones that heard it, apparently, too. I thought that maybe it was someone running away from someone or something, but our roof had that very steep triangle shape to it. Anyway, a few days after, again myself and my girlfriend were on our bed and we heard running above us. This time, though, it was quick, light running like a child. This time it was more odd. We went to ask my sisters again, but nothing, which was very strange. Anyway, every so often, we would hear these steps above us. I started believing that we had a person living in our attic, and every time I heard the steps, I'd pop my head in the attic and shine my phone around, but again, nothing. Eventually, I climbed all the way up to search too, but again, there was nobody up there. Nobody else heard them too, except me and my girlfriend, and it started getting very frustrating. I have anxiety and have always had trouble sleeping. When I'd hear the steps at night, it'd be very uncomfortable, and when it would wake me up, I'd have trouble falling back asleep. I started getting very angry at the situation, in fact, and I was a competitive boxer at the time, and sleep was pretty urgent for me. Myself and my girlfriend came to the conclusion that this was probably an animal or, who knows, maybe a ghost. Myself and my girlfriend came to the conclusion that this was probably just an animal. One day, though, I was alone in the house and I heard footsteps. At this point, I was pretty ticked off and I perfectly rushed my way up into the attic. I crawled around saying, "Here I am, I'm all by myself. What are you about? What do you want? Show yourself. Do something," etc. But there was nothing. One night, footsteps began at around 2 in the morning. I'm awake now and the stress is high. I start doing research on my phone, animal sounds on roof or walls, etc. Nothing sounded familiar and there was really no help. Ghost making footstep noises, apparently though, equals poltergeist, or noisy spirit in German. I researched the history and they're not ghosts but energies created by us humans allegedly. In the past they believed poltergeists were caused by teenage girls because of their strong emotions, and that for me was a bingo. My home at the time was a war zone of emotions, anger, sadness, cursing, yelling and fighting. Most of the issues were due to my twin sisters. Angela especially at the time was rebelling severely. She started hanging out with some bad kids and drinking and drugging and all that. My mum was strict, so they would fight bad about it, and once they even got into a small fist fight and the police were called. Of course, I'd get involved as well. Angela had very strong emotions. I was battling depression at this time due to being broke, and myself and my mum were bipolar. My sister Carla was clinically diagnosed as bipolar. But while researching, I learned that we could get rid of negative energy by bringing positive energy, like praying or saging your home, etc. Now, eventually, as I was up, my girlfriend woke up as well, and I told her that I heard the footsteps again and couldn't go back to sleep, and I told her about all of the research that I had found. She started doing some research of her own at this point. It was maybe around 15 minutes before 3 a.m., and my girlfriend says out loud, "I'm just waiting for it to be 3 a.m. because apparently that's when spirits are most active or something." I took it as a joke and sort of ignored it. But sure enough, at 3 a.m. on the dot, we heard the most aggressive, chaotic, and sporadic thumping yet. This time it was happening with no pattern, and it was all over our roof. My girlfriend grabbed my shoulder, terrified. I was paralyzed for about 3 seconds because I couldn't believe what I was hearing. After coming back to my senses, I picked up my phone and started recording, but unfortunately it was too late. It must have lasted about 4 seconds or so. All I got on my video was my cat freaking out. The video was saved and recorded at 3:01 a.m. officially, and this was the turning point for me. The next day, I went to each of one of my family members one by one, told them what happened and about Poltergeist. I also told them about what we had to do to remove this, and I told them that we have to chill out and no more fighting, work on our anger, let's pray at night together, and thankfully they actually all took it pretty seriously. We dialed it down severely, we saged the house, we prayed and read the Bible passages at night sometimes together. I proclaimed at our home that there was no room for negative energy, only positive energy, and we really did a 180 at this point. And amazingly, it actually worked. After some time, very suddenly it just sort of all stopped, not a peep. We never spoke about it as a family again, and I've been known to be one of the more responsible ones of my siblings. Aside from that time being very hard for me emotionally and financially, I have and am doing very well for myself, thankfully. Honestly, too, at the time, I really was the only one of the siblings that would have been able to handle this situation and turn it around, like I actually helped do. So, I'd like to believe that that's the reason why my room was the only ones that heard it. Maybe this occurrence happened in order for my family to be more at peace or something. Myself and Kylie are now married with a daughter. We moved into our current home on December 15th of 2023. When we settled in, we held hands and I proclaimed loudly to make sure that I was heard that in this house, there's no room for negative energy, only positive. My wife did her saging thing too and put oil on the doorways and prayed and all that. And thankfully, so far, so good. My mum and stepdad got married when I was 4. Mum and I moved into the house that my stepdad owned after they got married. It was just the 3 of us and our animals. I'm an only child, and at the time of the story, we had 2 big dogs who lived inside and out. The dogs usually roamed outside at night on the 20 acres that we owned. We lived in that house for about 14 years, and I saw my fair share of creepy stuff, but this story, it definitely sticks out the most. A little bit of background first, though. So, I was around 7. I don't exactly remember the age, but only the present that I got that year. I know that I was old enough to use the bathroom at night alone, but still young enough that my mum usually checked on me to make sure that I got back into bed okay. I also know for sure that it was Christmas Eve. I know this because our tree was always off at night, except for on Christmas Eve. Our house was pretty small, 850 square feet small, but I loved it. When you walked in the front door, you were immediately in the living room. Straight ahead was the hall. In reality, though, it was just a small rectangle that had doors on 3 of the 4 sides. From the living room or the front door, you could see into the bathroom. Heading to the bathroom, you had a closet on the left, a bathroom door, my bedroom door to the right, an empty wall the width of the door, and my parents' bedroom door as well. The kitchen was off of the left of the living room and shared a wall with the bathroom and the closet. It was super cute and just really cozy, and we also had an unfinished basement with the stairs in the living room by the kitchen door to the back porch. Now, I got up to use the bathroom Christmas Eve. I got up from my bed, went out of my bedroom door, and turned the corner into the bathroom. I, of course, being a kid, had to peek at the tree and the presents underneath. I thought that I saw a monster truck at one point. At the time, I was a huge fan and really wanted a remote control one, but I didn't stop to look because I really had to go. After I finished up my business, I got up and looked towards the living room. I really wanted to peek at my presents again before I went back to sleep, we didn't really close the doors in my house growing up unless we had people over, so I could see the front door and the glow of the tree from my seat. I looked back at the toilet to flush, and when I looked back up at the doorway between the hall and the living room, I saw the silhouette of a boy. He looked about my age from his height, but he had his back to me, so I'm not sure what his face looked like. He was standing in the doorway using his left hand to hold the door frame so that he could lean into the living room on his tiptoes and peek at the presents, I think. In his right hand, he had what looked like like a red sucker or something. His whole body was dark because of the lack of light and the Christmas lights shining behind him. I shuffled to the edge of the bathroom, so I was just inside the doorway. If I had put my arm straight out, I could have actually touched this kid. I'm standing there, about to ask what he's doing, when he slowly drops back down to his flat feet and starts to turn to face me. Now, as he starts to turn, I get the most intense feeling of dread, fear, and anxiety rush over me. I can see the profile of his face, and he's just smiling, staring straight ahead. Just as he's about to get all the way around, my mum walked out of her room and asked me if I'm okay. And in the split second that it took to look at her and back at the boy, he was now gone. I instantly felt better, and it was as if he just never even existed. I pointed to the living room, and my mum assumed that I was trying to peek at the presents, so she just tucked me back into bed, and I fell asleep pretty quick, woke up, and I totally forgot about it the next morning. I did get my remote control monster truck that year too, which I was super stoked about. And it was years before it came back to me, and I told my mum about it. She wasn't surprised too, because, well, like I said, a lot of weird stuff happened in that house. Before I got my car in my freshman year of college, I would use Lyft to get to work pretty much every day during the summer. During the winter or fall, though, I just walked, even at night. And in all of those Lyft cars and drivers, I never had any noticeable encounters, I guess. I've probably been in a couple of hundred by now, and aside from the occasional political opinion and speeder, it was all fine for the most part. Now one day, I order a Lyft car like normal. It'll be here in like 7 minutes. Cool. I walk outside a couple of minutes early to go and wait for my driver, and I see a vehicle that pretty much matches the description of mine sitting in my driveway. You know that sort of little car icon next to the profile that you can use to compare the real one? Well, it was the same color, the same size, and unless you notice the little details, it pretty much looked the same. But my driver was still apparently 2 minutes away. I choose to ignore him, thinking that it's just a funny coincidence and maybe he's a friend of a neighbor or something. But then he rolls down his window and looks at me, so I go up to talk to him. Maybe he's just lost? By the way too, a different race entirely from my actual driver, so I know for sure that it isn't him, but it's similar skin tones and age, I guess. He tells me that he's my driver, and pulls out his phone that has my profile like how your driver has to make sure that it's you. So in my naive and innocent teenage mind, I think to myself, oh, Lyft must have accidentally sent me 2 drivers, and tell him that he's not the driver that I was told I would meet. Right as we're talking, my actual driver pulled up and rolled down his window. I explained the situation, and said that I'll probably get in the first guy's car because, well, he was here first. But then my actual driver says that I should probably go with whoever is on my phone. That sounded pretty logical to me and made sense, but before I could turn around and tell the other guy that I was going to go ahead and pick the other guy, he drove off. Tinted windows, by the way. It wasn't until I got into the car that my driver brought it to my attention how weird that actually was. He told me that in his 10 years of being a Lyft driver that nothing like that had ever happened to him or anyone that he knew. Then it suddenly dawned on me about what might have just happened. The similar car appearance to my actual driver, the fact that he had my info but I didn't have his. The fact that he was there a couple of minutes early, so if I did get in, it wouldn't have intercepted my real driver, and just everything. And, stupidly, I almost got into his car too. I went to work and I was totally shaken up that day. I tried making a report to Lyft, but without any evidence or information other than a basic physical description, there really wasn't much that they could do. My Lyft driver said that he would go ahead and tell the story to some other driver friends on a social media forum, Facebook probably, so that they could spread the word. And so, I guess that made me feel a little bit better about the whole thing. But that driver, he might have actually saved my life that day, and I think about him a lot. And hey, my dad heard about it too and got me a car in the end. So I guess at least I got something other than trauma. I've also only told a couple of people in real life due to the traumatic and scary nature of the whole thing. Looking back on it now, it was most likely a trafficker or kidnapper. These guys probably have access to Lyft servers and look for repeating customers like me. I've since deleted the app and my account, but I guess the lesson from all of this is always check the license plates. Growing up, I didn't know if spirits or ghosts were real. My mind was open to the idea, but I had never experienced anything to believe it. Anyways, I was 23 when I first moved out of home to my first apartment. I'm 28 now, so this was some time back. I will say that living there for the most part was pretty normal, but on a couple of occasions, there were some moments that sent chills right down my spine. The first time, I was chilling with my lady friend. We were just laying on my couch watching a movie or something. The kitchen was small, so looking at the TV, you can see the whole kitchen. I had a cheap trash can where the top lid spins, so to dispose the trash, you can just throw it in. We were just chilling, and out of the corner of my eye, I see the lid spin a few times, as if someone slapped it to make it spin. I noticed it, but I didn't say anything. My lady friend then asks me like 10 seconds later if I saw that. I was like, holy cow, I wasn't tripping. We investigated the trash and nothing. At first I thought maybe a rat jumped onto it or something. I mean, we didn't have a rat problem, but I had no idea what else could have done that. In short, we had no idea what the heck it was, and we were quite shook for a while. The second moment, though, it genuinely made my heart sink, and I've never felt that feeling ever since then. So my girlfriend, she would come over a lot. This was after my lady friend. I'm not a cheater or anything, but she, among a few of my other friends, always told me that my apartment had a bad vibe to it. Like the energy in there was sort of dark. I didn't think much about it. But we had these two stuffed animals that we won at a claw machine at our local arcade. After some time of her feeling uneasy, for some reason we both concluded that those stuffed animals just gave off bad vibes. She removed them off the bookshelf and put them in my kitchen cabinet before I left for work that day, just to put them away for the time being. Keep in mind, I dropped her off at her house and she didn't have a key to the apartment, and I always double-locked it. Fast forward a bit, I get back from work and decide to take a nap. I laid on my couch, and the way that I was laying, the bookshelf was in front of me a bit to the left side of the wall. At the time, I was having a lot of sleep paralysis. I still do from time to time, but in hindsight, I did experience a lot of sleep paralysis in that apartment for some reason. So of course, I'm waking up in sleep paralysis mode. My eyes open, unable to move. I look, and all I see are those two stuffed animals sitting in the exact spot that they were at. My first thoughts were, what the heck? How the heck did those get back on there? It was impossible for those things to get back on that shelf, unless they walked back there, which obviously is impossible. Or is it? My heart sank into my gut. I felt my skin crawl, and that feeling of unease just took over my body. After I was finally able to move, I called her and asked if she put them back before we left the apartment, and she swore up and down that she didn't. She couldn't believe what I was telling her, as we were both in disbelief. I disposed of those 2 stuffed animals in the big trash, this time certain that they would never pop back up again. Now, I still consider myself a skeptic, as I never again had any other experiences with what I believe was paranormal. But the couple of times that I did, it was at those apartments. I actually had a friend who grew up in them, and she told me that they were definitely haunted. She's seen and heard things there too, but anyway. I should have probably mentioned too that at one point my girlfriend claimed that she one time saw a big shadow figure above me. It was allegedly in the corner of the ceiling, and I vividly remember her looking up too and telling me too. Of course, when I turned around, there was nothing there, but I did feel my skin crawl a bit after she told me that. She used to stay there when I went off to work as well, and always told me that she just always felt like she was being watched. It was the main reason that I started dropping her off back at her house when I would leave for work. I was working at a small business in Iowa when a man came in for an interview. He was polite enough, but didn't really say much. But something about him just felt really off. While my boss interviewed him, I stocked shelves, listening to the man answer our standard questions. What's your availability? Have you ever been arrested? Things like that. When he left, the manager asked me what I thought. There's something weird about him. I got really bad vibes about him. The boss kind of chuckled at me and said, "We can't deny someone employment because of bad vibes." I took out my phone and Googled the guy's name, and he had been arrested a few months prior for threatening to shoot up a gas station after being accused of theft. He lied and said that he had never been arrested. Is that good enough reason to not hire someone? It was. And, as it turns out, it may have actually saved my life. I remember September 2018, a beautiful clear day, the calmness broken by the sound of police cars flying down the road. A student had been murdered in the middle of the day on a nearby golf course. She had passed a group of men, who very shortly later found her things abandoned on the ground. Concerned, they called management, and shortly after, she was found. Her body floating in a pond. Everybody was in shock. This was the second murder of a young student Iowa had in just a few weeks. Was it a disgruntled fellow golfer? A jealous lover? No. The young woman had simply been in the wrong place at the wrong time. She did not know her killer. He did not know her. He was a homeless man who was found in the woods by the golf course, saw an opportunity, and he took it. He had fantasies about these sorts of things, and the next day the story made headlines, and plastered on the front was the killer's face. My stomach turned when I saw him, because he looked just so familiar. I didn't recognize the name, but then again I've never been good with names. But I remember stories, and so I googled his name. And the same story about a man being arrested for threatening to shoot up a gas station came up, and instantly I knew who he was. It was the same man that I had convinced my boss not to hire. At the job, the majority of shifts there were only 1 or 2 of us working, which means that I definitely would have been alone with this guy at so many points, so many slow hours with few customers, so many blind spots. There would have been hundreds, possibly thousands of opportunities to be alone with him. It only took a few minutes for a murder to occur on a beautiful day on a golf course. So how much more opportunity would there have been if he had been hired? So yes, do trust your instincts, because if they're anything like mine, they may just save your life one day. I have no idea what to do. The last month has been filled with fear and paranoia. You see, I had this incident around a month back. I don't know what the time in the night was that this happened, but I'm certain that it was in the AM. I just woke up with this feeling of dread and fear. My room was lit in a dark blue from my LED lights. Near the door to my room stood my mum. I called out to her quietly. As she approached the foot of my bed slowly, it became evident that it was not my mum, only looked like her. Her head began to tilt slowly as she stared at me. I moved to the foot of my bed to kick her away, but my foot went completely through her. She then disappeared and reappeared at the side of my bed and began approaching me closer. As quickly as she appeared, she then disappeared. I told my dad about it, but he said that it was just a nightmare, so I pretend like it didn't feel real. Until that same day, my friend and I were driving around. I've always known that she was a bit of a medium, as we're both paranormal investigators. However, this really cemented this for me. You see, I didn't tell her anything about this thing's appearance, but her eyes widened and she quickly drove out of the neighborhood that we were in. She was repeating to herself, saying, "We have to get out of here." She later described exactly what was there with me in my room, from the clothes to the height. That night we went to a Catholic church and we prayed. I've been praying every night since then, and I haven't been able to have the lights off at all. Everything was quiet too for a while, until the last 5 days, because 5 nights ago, I then froze in my bed. I was laying on my stomach and I felt a hand press on my shoulder. I couldn't move, but the same sense of dread filled me. 4 nights ago, I was laying on my side when I felt something brush my hair out of my face. Once again, I couldn't move. 3 nights ago, I was laying on my side when I felt someone laying behind me. I was completely frozen in fear and dread. The last 2 nights have been sleepless, and even last night I cried to God begging for protection. So my question for all of you guys is, does anyone know what this thing is, or how I can protect myself, or maybe even get rid of it? So, I've had several supernatural experiences, and I figured that I would share some that have stood out. I worked as an officer at a prison, and although I've moved on to a new facility, I have been an officer for the past 12 years. One of the major skills I've learned is how to retain and recall details, which helps recount events that I witness. This makes report writing much easier, and is helping me recount these events here as well. The prison I worked at was the oldest operational in my state and was built in the 1870s, in an old style with a big brick wall that runs the prison's perimeter. The place has been updated over the years, but some areas that still operated had little done to them since it was built. Now, when I started, the old heads told all of us that the place was haunted, given everyone who had died over the years. Different places more than others, like the old unit that was a segregation, or what some people might know as the hole, with all the prison graffiti. I never gave it much thought because if I do not experience it, then it is just a cool story, but not confirmed. Now, I worked there for around 8 months when I first saw something strange. I was working overtime at night on what's called a one-on-one, where you have to watch a prisoner who is feeling suicidal and make sure that they don't do anything. It meant that I needed to stay up all night and check to make sure that the prisoner was breathing every 15 minutes, and I had a partner who walked by every 28 minutes, so I knew that I was awake. It was about 2 a.m. and I had just used my flashlight to illuminate the cell of the prisoner that I was watching and confirm that he was breathing. I looked down to mark the check on my clipboard and I saw movement out of the corner of my eyes. My partner had just done his round 15 minutes prior, and all the prisoners were supposed to be locked in their cells, so there shouldn't be any movement down there. I turn and see someone doing a round on the housing unit, but he isn't right. This guy is wearing a blue uniform with a Breton cap, shiny black leather belt, and has a baton in his hand. The problem is that these uniforms haven't been used by my department since the 1950s, and our uniforms are not blue. They're grey and modern, whereas this one was very much old. I watched this guy walk down the unit for maybe 5 seconds, and then I shook my head and slapped my face to make sure that I was awake. When I looked back, there was no one there anymore. The next thing that happened was roughly 2 years later during my normal shift. Now, the central building of the prison I worked in is a big room called a rotunda. It has 2 floors, but it is open, so you can see the balcony up on the top levels, and anyone who is leaving the rotunda can be seen from the opposite side, even on the balcony. The doors into the wings that branch off the balcony all have windows, and most of the rooms directly connected have windows too. It was maybe 2100, and I was going to the rotunda to complete some paperwork with a co-worker for my sergeant, which is pretty common. As we were opening the open barred gate to go into the rotunda, I looked up and I noticed that the administrative wing lights appeared to be dimmed through the window into the door. I commented to my co-worker that we would need to report that a light was out in the administrative wing. It was then that we were both looking at the window that we observed something move in the window, and we realized that this was not a light malfunction, that instead a shadow person or something like that was standing in front of the window. While we were watching this shadow move to its left and through a solid wall into another room, we saw its silhouette through the window of that room. Well, we just looked at each other and we kept going. The third experience that I was about 3 years in as an officer by the point that this one happened. I was working the 3rd shift in the control center, which is where we use the cameras and security measures and all that. Also, I should mention that there are several rifle posts around the prisoner's perimeter that are used to ensure the security of the prison, but we only ever used like 3 of them during operational hours. In this case, it's important for you to know that when a phone is left off the hook, the phone rings into the control center so that we can address the issue. When the call rings through, you can pick up the phone and hear anything on the other end that may be being said in the area, which is important in case we're dealing with a staff assault or a hostage situation or something like that. So, I'm working as the electronic monitoring officer, which means the camera controls are my main responsibility, along with the perimeter security. As I'm working, the phone rings and the institutional caller ID says 1 post, which is odd because that post is not used because it's too small for a modern person to comfortably fit inside of it. Also, at this time there is nobody that should be near it, and for someone to reach it, they would have to set off at least 2 security alarms, which I was in charge of monitoring. Given the fact that the guy who was doing the perimeter checks was a bit of a prankster, I guess you could say, I figured that it was just him playing a prank and that he knew a way around the sensors somehow. So I answer the phone and all I hear is static, which is continuously increasing and decreasing in volume. Like someone has an old television on a static-filled channel and is moving the volume up and down constantly. I hang up the phone and move the camera to look at the post, and I can see right inside there that there is no one in there. As I'm looking at it, the phone rings again as an off the hook at 1 post. This time, my lieutenant picks up the phone and after a minute walks back to me asking if the perimeter officer is playing games, because he can hear mumbling blurred out by static from 1 post. He sees that I have the camera pointed at it, and that there is no one in there. The lieutenant tells me to have the perimeter officer check it because an animal may have gotten in the post and knocked the phone off the hook or something. The officer took a while to get there as he had been on the other side of the perimeter, and he had to climb 5 flights of stairs to get there. During this time, the phone has continued to ring from 1 post until I can see the officer opening the door, at which point the phone just stops ringing. The officer opens the door with his flashlight on and calls over the radio that there's no phone in the post. my lieutenant responds that there must be one because the calls keep coming through. In response, the officer holds up a disconnected phone line so that the camera can see it and says that that is the only thing in the post. This post has not been used since like the early 80s, I think. Like I said, it was way too small of a space. The phone would still ring now and again on the third shift until we updated our phone system to an internet-based system, upon which it stopped. This next experience, I had been an officer for about 4 years at this point. I was working my regular shift as the electronic monitoring officer. I went on a restroom break, which means that I had to leave my post and go about 100 yards away to the nearest restroom. As I'm in the restroom, I distinctly hear the sound of boots clapping on the tile floor of the hallway that leads to this restroom, among other rooms in that wing. As the sound gets closer to the restroom, I can hear the large folger keys that are clinking together on their waist as they walk. When it sounded like they were right outside the door, I called out saying, "I'll be out in a minute," and I didn't hear the sounds after I said that. Thinking that someone was waiting outside, I hurried up and washed my hands, not taking more than a few minutes. I opened the door and there was no one there. The hallway is long enough and has 3 entry doors that I would have heard open and close as well as any other door in the hallway, to where they would have had issues getting out of the hallway noiselessly in the time between me calling them and leaving the restroom. I returned to my post and I asked my sergeant if he saw anyone go into the wing while I was down there. He said that he didn't and asked why. Knowing that he was someone who believed in ghosts, given that he and I had talked about how he used to do independent paranormal investigations, I told him what happened. His face went slack and his eyes got large as he said, "Go check the video." I returned to my position and watched the video of that hallway, the hallway of the wing above that one, and the areas outside the wing. And I confirmed that no one was in that area during that time, except for me, and there were no signs of distortions or anything. Now, the final one that I'll share for today is that I had been an officer for about 6 years and was working my regular shift. I was watching the medication lines after the diner lines were done, and my sergeant was talking with me. Not like a management thing, but we were friends and just wanted to have a conversation while ensuring that prisoners weren't passing meds or fighting or worse. The medical hallway that I was watching is connected at one end to the rotunda and at the other end to one of the main housing blocks, specifically right next to our main segregation unit. As we were talking, we heard what sounded like muffled talking from a radio. Checking our radio, we realized that it was none of us, so we began searching the area around us. Given the location, there shouldn't be an unattended radio, so it was a security issue and of some concern. As we proceeded to search the area, we realized that the intercom system speaker for the segregation unit was making the sounds. This intercom, unlike a standard housing unit, is not used frequently, which is why we were surprised to find it transmitting sound. The sergeant points at it and says that it must be broken. The switch is in an off position and the activation light is off. I looked closely and I got goosebumps as I made a shocking discovery, saying, "Sarge, how is it doing that when it's not plugged in?" I held up the unplugged cord leading out of the intercom box and gave it a slight tug to show that it was attached directly to the box. The sergeant's face went completely white and he walked off shaking his head, just saying, "Nope," over and over again. These intercoms don't have backup batteries or anything too, and there are no direct power-up hookups or anything like that. Just the cord that I had already shown was disconnected. The sounds, though, they continued for the duration of the medication lines. I left the area after that, and I never heard of it doing that again. So, that's everything that I've experienced, but if you guys would like to hear more of the other stories that I've heard from there anyway, Just let me know and I'll be sure to share some more. Thanks for listening, and if you're interested in doing a job like this, please do not let stories like this get in the way, because it really is a very fulfilling career. So this all starts with a guy named Daniel. Daniel was at one time an acquaintance of my ex-husband. He was never my favorite person, honestly, as he was kind of an incel, I guess, a lifelong drug addict, and also had a chip on his shoulder because his family had money. He was a liar, thought that he was slick, and did creepy stuff like once I came home and he was folding my clothes out of the dryer. I don't know why he thought I would approve of such, including folding my underwear into tiny little squares with a lot of care. You get it though, Daniel is a loser. And look, I know that that's mean, but he really has no redeeming qualities. Thankfully, after a while, their associate friendship runs its course and he sort of fades into obscurity as a bad memory. I hear very little concerning him for the next 10 or so years, save one thing: he has lost his mind. But that's just a throwaway statement a lot of the times. So-and-so has gone crazy and lost their mind. I had the thought that he'd always been like that, and forgot about him once again. About 2 years ago, I pull up to my house though, and notice a side-by-side sport utility vehicle in my driveway that I've never seen before. When I walk in, I see this unkempt, wild-eyed looking man that appeared homeless, really. I followed my husband to our room and whispered, "Who the heck is that guy?" And he looks surprised and says, It's Daniel. He's, well, sort of insane now. Apparently his family keeps him in the house mostly because he doesn't do well in public and freaks people out now. But he stole their side-by-side and drove it over an hour to our house, where he has run out of gas to go back home. I instantly get a bad feeling when I see him. Before I even know it's Daniel, this guy's aura is just all wrong. His vibe is messed up, and I get even more and more wigged out the longer that he is here, because he's having a full-on conversation with, well, himself. This was sinister, and I didn't like his replies to whatever he was talking to as well. Whatever was speaking to him was saying hostile things about us. For example, he listened intently, then laughed wildly and shook his head. No, they ain't like that. That is funny, though. Like, what the heck, right? I'm just trying not to make him feel any type of way, because I know that this may not be something that he can control or help, and I don't want to make him uncomfortable or embarrassed, but I'm getting more and more uncomfortable myself the longer this goes on. Finally, after like 20 minutes of talking to something, he sort of looks at me sheepishly and says, "I apologize, I have demons, but I'm working on that." I nod and tell him that I understand. My husband rounds up some gas by his side-by-side, and then he leaves. At first, I'm really relieved because I was feeling really freaked out by the time that he bounced. When I knew that he was gone, I was sitting on my bed doing some craft project, and my husband is in the master adjoined bathroom doing something with a tool. I then quiz him. What the heck is Daniel talking to? He tells me that he believes that he's talking to demons that follow him and tell him things, and so he was speaking to a demon with a full-on conversation, at least in his mind, which heightens my bad vibe meter to the max, let me tell you. I tell him that I don't feel comfortable with him in my home. I don't want him back here where me and my children are. He's dangerous. I do pity him, but I just instinctively know that he's dark and dangerous. My husband says okay, and he doesn't think he'll be coming back anyway. Quite suddenly, though, I then feel a pain in my arm like I cannot describe. For a few moments, I really think that my husband has accidentally shot metal across the space with whatever he was doing with that buzzing Dremel tool, and he's just shot the heck out of me. I put my flat hand over the inside of my arm, below the elbow and above the wrist, and put pressure, but it doesn't stop. Intense pain, a weird pain like I've never felt before. I scream. I move my hand to look, but don't see any blood, so I couldn't have been hit with shrapnel from this tinkering or anything. But I did see sort of half-moon claw prints dug into my arm, like someone had grabbed it and just sunk their nails into it. Not scratched, just dug in. There were at least 40 to 50 between my inner wrist and inner elbow, and to my horror, I literally watched while more appeared right in front of my eyes. I yelled for my husband to come here, and I showed him my arm and asked him what it looked like to him. "Dang, who clawed you up like that?" was his response. I shook my head and said nobody, and explained what had just happened before they appeared out of, well, seemingly nowhere. What he did next sent a chill down me. "Daniel didn't leave his demon here when he left, and it's clawed you up, did he?" he jokingly said with a little laugh. He was kidding, but as soon as he said it, I knew that it was true. It didn't like me talking about Daniel like that, and it clawed me up to punish me. I told him not to say that, and I quietly freaked out about it until I went to bed and tried to keep it off my mind. A couple of days later, we were laying in bed and my husband was spooning me with his arm draped over my side. He had just nodded off when I felt that weird otherworldly pain in my side under his arm, and I just knew that it had clawed me again. I cried out and shook him awake in a panic, and I asked him to move his arm before raising my shirt and asking what my side looked like. He looked crazy and said it looked clawed up like my arm had, and he watched me while more claw marks sprung up until my side was covered in them. Honestly, he was pretty much as shook as I was. Well, almost. But throughout the next few months, I always felt like I was being watched too. I would randomly get this same weird type of pain, followed by some type of mark in the pained area. I basically had to exercise my house over and over. It would work for like a week or two, and then it would always come back. Not as strong, but it definitely kept coming back. Looking back, I sincerely believe that Daniel isn't just hearing voices that aren't really there. I think that the demons that he says that he talks to are exactly what he says they are. I think that the one that he dragged up into my house that night either decided I was weak and it would get to me, it saw something in me that it liked and wanted, or it sought to punish me for talking about Daniel the way that I did. Whatever the case, it was seeking only me because nothing had happened to anyone else in the house. There was also a lot of DV in our home, and I was the victim of it. I think that it was feeding on the negativity in the home. I felt like it was always just on the edges, lurking or waiting to be able to get back in to get to me, and it was awful. I've since divorced and moved on, and I came to a better place spiritually. But this experience taught me that what you don't believe in, you cannot defend yourself from. And I, for one, will never make that mistake again. I'm 30 now, but this happened when I was 16, and it has just always stuck with me. I was playing some OG Paper Mario one afternoon after school, and as I was playing, I heard my mother call me from downstairs. I paused and called back. "Yeah, what's up?" "Come down to the office, please. I need help with something." "Okay, I'll be right there," I said as the good and helpful son that I was. I went downstairs to the office to find it empty. Confused, I went to the kitchen, my mother's bedroom, all the places that she'd normally be. I even went to the garage to find that her car wasn't even there. I went to the living room to find my father reading the paper. I asked him where Mum was, and he said that she wasn't even home yet. I stood there for a while processing that information before my dad asked what was wrong. I told him that I definitely heard Mum asking me for help in the office. He simply shrugged and said that he didn't know what to tell me, and went back to reading his paper. So, yeah, something called out to me in the voice of my mother asking for help, and my mother definitely wasn't home. The whole thing has confounded me to this day. This is going to be a little bit lengthy, as this has been an occurrence in my life over the course of the past 10 years, so I apologize for the length of this. Now, I'm a believer in the paranormal world due to other experiences, but I am also open to the fact that this could be sleep deprivation or stress induced, I guess, but the moment of times that I've dealt with this and the fact that I have been consciously awake every time, it definitely makes me wonder. I'm 30 years old now, and my first encounter began in 2012, while I was a freshman at college. I was on academic probation over a long weekend, so the rest of my roommates were gone for the weekend, and I was stuck in my dorm for the weekend all by myself. One night, as I had finished my homework and was tired of mindlessly scrolling through my phone, I got unusually tired and fell asleep in my bed at around 8 p.m. with the lights on. After about 20 minutes into my snooze, I felt like I wasn't alone all of a sudden and just sort of jolted awake. Now, our beds were over our desks in a sort of bunk configuration. I rolled over and looked into the middle of the room below me and was shocked to see a humanoid figure curled up into the fetal position. I honestly thought that I was dreaming, so I just continued to blink and rub my eyes and was telling myself to wake up, but soon realized that I wasn't dreaming at all. After about 30 seconds, it seemed to register that I was staring at it, and it slowly stood up. I was in complete utter shock, and I just froze. It looked just like a person, but with no face or hair features, no clothes, just humanoid opaqueness, I guess. I couldn't even discern gender. It was about 5'9" and slowly walked towards my direction. Nothing felt evil or malicious about it, but I didn't want to test that theory by any means. Unfortunately, it was between me and the door, and I had to run past it to escape my room. I yelled at it to stop approaching me, as soon as my fight or flight instinct overrode my being frozen in fear, and as it was only 3 feet away from me, I jumped from my bunk onto the floor and bolted past it. Mind you, it never reached out or interfered with my escape as I ran into the halls of my dorm with pure adrenaline and fear. With it being a weekend, there was hardly anybody present, but I cooled myself down and quickly walked to find the closest human contact that I could find. I finally found one of my friends down the hall who was still present. As to not sound insane, I didn't tell a soul of my experience. I chalked it up to being tired and stressed with school, but unfortunately, I had to eventually make my way back to my room to sleep alone again. I finally summoned the courage to leave my friend's room and go back to mine after a few hours. I entered my room and there was nothing there. I stayed awake with the lights on for the rest of the night with an uneasy feeling, but nothing else happened. Fast forward to 2013. My roommates and I had switched to a different room. Every year we had to switch rooms. Nothing else had happened until late fall, and this time all of my roommates were present, and it was a school night, and we had all just begun to fall asleep, 3 of us total. Once again I got that uneasy feeling, and once again I rolled over to find that humanoid figure standing near the head of my bed, reaching up towards me this time. I absolutely freak and wake up my roommates, who throw the light on. As soon as the light came on, it had disappeared. To my roommates' justifiable annoyance, they told me to go to sleep and that I'm just imagining things. This occurs 2 more times throughout my college years, with the last college incident occurring in my senior year. Once again, I was asleep and awoke to an uneasy feeling. I had accidentally left my closet open, and as I peered into it, I saw the figure again, just standing there staring into me. I fixate on it, just telling myself that it's just my overactive imagination. But as I was wishing it away, it stepped out of the closet, and just like the other times, it begins to approach me. I scream at it, demanding it to not take a step closer or else, and then it just disappeared into, nothingness. I then graduate and join the military. Thinking that it was just college-induced stress, I felt like the encounters would end, especially with me leaving my old dorm for my first duty station in Florida. At this point, I'm engaged to my now wife and have 2 dogs. And to shorten the now long story, the shadow people, they would continue to follow me. It didn't matter which apartment or house I would move to, I would never be able to escape the terrifying encounters of whatever these things are. It would always start with my dogs growling at our bedroom doors, and then full manifestations. My wife would awake me to shouting at something, demanding it not to come closer and to leave me and my family alone. It would absolutely freak my wife out as she could not see the figures I was confronting. Each visit, it would just get a little closer before disappearing after I confronted it. It would always get close, but it would never actually reach me. I could also sense that it was never the same shadow person, and each subsequent visit, it seemed more foreboding and with negative intent. It also had this weird sort of pull to it as well, like it was drawn to me. This happened about 4 or 5 times from 2017 to 2019, and this leads me to the final encounter that I had in 2020. My wife was pregnant with my son at the time, and I was a month out from deployment, knocking out my pre-deployment training. This last encounter was different from the rest too, and was the single most terrifying paranormal or stress-induced event that I've ever witnessed. I was asleep with my wife in my bed. I had only been asleep maybe an hour when I woke up because I couldn't breathe. I had felt 2 hands wrapped around my neck and weight on my chest. As I struggled to breathe, I saw the shadow person above me this time, and it felt like it was trying to suffocate me. I hadn't even registered it as a shadow person. I thought it was a home invader at first. I wrestled with it, or at least it felt like I was, and I could feel it and grab it this time. Once I got the upper hand, it sprung to the bedroom floor and crawled under my bed. My wife was already awake as I was thrashing about. Thinking that it was an intruder, I was trying to find a weapon and told my wife to escape the house and call the cops. She, of course, refused and told me that it was all a bad dream. I looked under the bed to find nothing there, of course. My wife told me that I was just stressed with the upcoming deployment. I was incredibly embarrassed and utterly terrified. I saged the house just in case and tried to work on my stress. And weirdly enough, that was the last encounter, and I haven't had another one since then. Now, I know that this could all be psychological, but it doesn't take away how terrifying it is in the moment. Of note is the fact that I'm never half awake. I'm always wide awake when I went through these encounters. I don't have sleep paralysis and I don't sleepwalk. I hardly tell this story to anyone unless they're a believer in the paranormal, as I know that it sounds super made up and I wouldn't believe it either if I hadn't have gone through it. I just know what I experienced and how it made me feel. Most won't believe my story, and that's fine. I'm sharing this to see if anyone else has had a similar experience with shadow people or could explain the psychological reason if there are any. I guess the only thing that would go against that psychological reasoning is the fact that my dogs, they always seem to react to it as well. This happened when I was 15 and my little sister was 12. A little bit of backstory here. We lived in this small town for several years and it was a very safe place. A few few years into living there, we had a cop with his wife and kids move in 2 houses down from us. Our house was built sometime in the 1920s, I think. A few nights before this incident, our other siblings locked us out of the back door. Us being idiots, we kicked the back door in. The door didn't budge, but the frame came out of the wall and the door was just hanging there. One of our blinds were broken and we didn't have the money to fix it, seeing as my parents had 8 kids and money was really tight growing up. Anyways, the blinds were broken behind our TV. On the other side of the window was a garage and our driveway. Next to the driveway on our neighbor's property, which was abandoned and had tall shrubs. What we didn't know was that there were 2 people hiding in the shrubs, watching us. I'm going to leave a few details out to make a long story short, but if you have any questions, then please do drop them below. My little sister's name is Candace and my name is Aria. So, it was the summer of 2009. My oldest brother and his girlfriend were a mile from our house fishing about 10 at night. Fishing, right? All of our siblings and parents were asleep. Besides my older brother out with his girlfriend fishing, I was sitting in front of the TV watching it. Candace was sitting in the bed watching TV with me too, when all of a sudden Candace and I heard a very loud crash noise from the back door. We both screamed. We got up, ran to the phone and called our brother's cell phone. He said that he was on his way because his girlfriend apparently twisted her ankle. He gets home and by this point we woke everyone up in the house and had all the lights on. My brother tells us to stay in the house. My brother is 6'4" and 300 pounds. Unknown to my family, I slipped outside to check with my brother. I know it was stupid of me to do this, but I was a curious kid. I saw my brother being really quiet. He ran back to our fenced-in backyard and he gets within arm reach of this guy and he steps on a stick. The guy turns and looks back at my brother and takes off running and hops the fence, and he got away, sadly. I unfortunately didn't see all this because I went back into the house after a while. This is just what my brother told me. But my brother comes in and he tells everyone that he saw a guy all in black and he's about 6 foot, and that's all that he saw. The rest of the night was pretty much calm, my brother on high alert though. The next night my brother was out with his girlfriend wherever they were at the time. It was again about 10 at night. Candace and I were watching TV again in the same spot as last time. Again we hear a loud crash coming from the back door. We screamed again and called our brother's cell phone again, and he came home again. The whole house was awake again and all the lights on. My brother goes out and checks it out, and this time he didn't see anyone out there. Oh, I forgot to mention too, both of these times, we looked at the back door and both times the back door looked like it was kicked really hard. This time around the frame was out of the wall more and the door was leaning further into the house at this point. We didn't make a police report because we had a cop that lived 2 houses down from us. But while he was at work, us kids would help take care of his pregnant wife, bring her over food, play with her kids and all that. We really didn't see him much, and when we did, he was really sweet and nice, but anyways, we told the police officer what had happened. He told us that he thinks that there are 2 guys out there and that they've been stalking our house and watching us. The cop comes over and checks and looks. He said that one of the guys seems to be on lookout and hides right here in the shrubs. He keeps lookout while the other one does the possible breaking in. He said that they had to have been looking through our broken blinds. He said that at night they could be looking in and you really couldn't see anything if you were looking out. After those 2 nights, there was no attempted break-ins anymore. But fast forward to the fall of that year and our cop neighbor told us. So, I'm not actually supposed to tell you all this, but we actually caught a peeping Tom. He's in jail now, about 20 or so miles away. And he said that after this peeping Tom got caught, that perhaps that's why everything stopped. That is, he suspected that this guy was the guy trying to break in. He said that the town was safe again because of this, and Candace and I were really freaked out and kind of scared. To this day, her and I always have our windows and doors always locked. We check multiple times a day, in fact. If any of our curtains are open, we get scared and we close the curtains every time. I'm honestly afraid that it'll happen again one day. We no longer live in that town, but that thought is definitely still there. To this day, we don't know what their intentions were, but I do think that if he would have gotten in, that there's a very good chance that we wouldn't be here today. And that is a scary thought. I grew up in a small Southern Californian town, known for its orange groves from days gone by. All those groves have been replaced by housing developments, and also shopping centres now, but there were still quite a few around when I was growing up in the late 90s. My friend Johnny and I used to get into all kinds of trouble back then. We were just general miscreants, I guess, but there was one time that I truly believe that we almost became victims of a child predator. If anyone listening to this also grew up in the 90s, then you know that it was a different era. We'd be out all times of the day, and our parents would have no idea where we were. There were lots of kidnappings back then too, and I can remember multiple times that I was offered candy or asked by some creep to help him find his cat. I always said that I'd go and check with my mum, and by the time that she'd get outside ready to whoop some butt, they'd always be gone. Anyway, Johnny and I were up to no good one day after school, like always. We were traipsing around this orange grove that bordered his street. We started pulling these little metal dam things off of the irrigation channels and tossing them wantonly. All of a sudden, though, we heard a sharp whistle, and both looked up to see this man about maybe 25 feet away from us, wagging his finger and going, But his reaction was not at all proportional to the property damage that we were causing. He clearly didn't own or work in the grove, because instead of screaming at us to stop, he had a grin from ear to ear, and I can still see his face in my mind all these years later, and it gives me chills. Johnny and I stood there for a second watching this guy. Then we looked at each other, and Johnny looked back toward the guy and shouted, "Run!" I look over and the guy is in an all-out sprint toward us now. Despite the physical exertion that he was putting into his sprint, the grin was still on his face. Johnny and I ran harder and faster than we ever had before. We made it out of the grove and back to his house before noticing that the guy wasn't behind us anymore. We quickly forgot about it because Johnny's family had just gotten a Nintendo 64 and we started playing Mario. I cannot remember if it was the next day or week or what, but sometime after this happened, we were both with his mum getting donuts, and we saw a wanted poster with a sketch of a man that looked awfully similar to the guy who chased us. He was apparently wanted for trying to kidnap a boy outside of a school. Johnny and I looked at each other and seemingly telepathically agreed to never say a word. I don't know why we never spoke up. Maybe it's because we were at an age where we'd be relentlessly bullied by homophobes because of the mere possibility that we could have been, assaulted like that. But we never did speak of it again. As I'm sharing this, I'm considering reaching out to him to see if he remembers and if it aligns with my memory of the incident. There were so many different things that happened in my childhood in the 90s that could have easily ended with me dead. Somehow I'm still here, and I even have my own family now. I trust no one because of incidents like this, and these days, I always have my head on a swivel. A few years ago, my mother died after a long battle with cancer. In her last few weeks, she was bedridden at home at one point and on heavy pain medication. The whole family took turns to help and spend time with her, and what she told us towards the end gave us all a shock. She kept having a scared reaction to something. She'd jump up and say, "Oh my goodness," or she'd swear as if something had made her jump. She didn't say anything at first, but then after a week or two, blurted out something one day that gave us all the creeps. "I wish he'd stop scaring me. Tell him to go away." She was annoyed at something, or someone to be exact. Confused, we asked her what the problem was, and she told us. Apparently, in her last few weeks, she kept seeing her deceased partner walking around the house. He'd walk down the hallway or past her bedroom door, or sometimes he'd be sitting in her room, and every time that it would happen, she would jump with fright, obviously not expecting to see him there. She was more annoyed than scared, I guess, but she'd see him several times a day, just going about his business as if he'd never left. Usually her reaction would be, "Oh, for goodness sake, go away." Not because she didn't want to see him, but because it kept making her jump. Our first thought was that it was something to do with the pain medication that she was receiving, but the nurse assured us that it wouldn't cause hallucinations or visions or anything. It absolutely terrified us to know that as well. She went into hospice a few weeks later, and it was then too that the visions stopped. Weird, huh? We still don't even talk about it either, because that's how creeped out we all are by it. I've debated sharing this for, well, a long time, but never got around to it, mainly because I try to keep this memory out of my brain. This might be a long one, but it's a creepy thing that happened to me about 4 years ago. So, for starters, I grew up in southwest Saskatchewan and moved on to my aunt's farm in 2019 to live in the other house that is on their property. The house is fairly old, but to be honest, I loved it. It wasn't long, though, after I moved in that I started to feel, I guess, uneasy in the house, alone. I would close every window when it got dark, as it felt like something was watching me through them every night. Eventually, I decided to get a puppy to keep myself company when my boyfriend at the time was at work or away from the house. It helped to have the company, but I always dreaded having to take her outside when it was dark. For a bit of scene setting, our house sat on the left side of the gravel road. At the back of the house, there was about 10 meters of backyard, and then there was the cow pasture and the cow barn. We didn't own cows, but in the summer another farmer would rent out our pasture space, and so we would have them on the property. It wasn't uncommon at night to hear coyotes around the farm either, and there were tons of them as well. Every so often when I'd go out with my puppy, we'd hear them all around us, too close for comfort as well. We had a farm dog too who would keep the coyotes away for the most part, as she was huge. But every so often she would wander elsewhere on the property to scout, and the coyotes would get a little too close. They always tried to lure my puppy out to them as well, but luckily I kept her leashed. Now, one thing you should know about my pup is that it takes her forever to find a spot to go potty. This is still a problem today, 4 years later even, but back then it was the bane of my existence. She would pace for at least 5 minutes, and that was only after finding a suitable spot. Sometimes we would be out there for like near half an hour, just so she would go, and not go in the house, another problem of hers. Huskies, am I right? Anyway, on this particular night, it was raining pretty heavily. I was not happy to be out there, and she had decided that she wasn't going to go until she found her perfect spot. We had already been out there for 15 minutes, and at this point, she was also getting frustrated with the rain and wanted to go inside. But I wanted her to go before we went in, since we'd already been out there for so long. So, as any annoyed puppy mother would do, I started getting a little bit frustrated and would repeat, go potty, every time that she'd get distracted from her objective. It was dark, I was cold and annoyed, and to make matters worse, the cows behind us were fussing fairly loudly too. This was out of the ordinary for them. They were usually quiet and sleeping at this time of night. I was also hearing what sounded like a strange bird whistling, but shook it off as probably being an owl up in a tree somewhere. I tried to keep it out of my mind as I kept shouting and pleading, go. I was facing away from the pasture, and suddenly though, in my left ear I heard it. Go. Now, one thing you should know about me is that I have a very strong flight response typically, but this froze me on the spot, as I was mostly confused at what the heck I'd just heard. I tried telling myself I didn't hear it. I tried telling myself that it was just a moo from a cow that I had heard wrong. But again, as if spoken directly behind me, I heard it again. Go, go. It sounded unnatural. It was as if it came from someone who had never spoken a word before. A raspy, deep, monotone go. It almost sounded like it was coming out of an old radio. But of course, there were no radios out there. Every time that it said it, it sounded the exact same as the first time it was said, and whatever it was had started repeating it as if it had been taught its new favorite word. At this point, I spun around to the pasture to find nothing there. But then, again from behind me, in the opposite direction now, go. This had all happened in the span of about 3 seconds, and at this point, I remember shouting out loud, "All right, you don't have to tell me twice," as I picked up my little furball and made a dash for my front door. I swiftly locked both doors behind me and sat bewildered in my kitchen. Puppy went back to puppying immediately, obviously unbothered by it all, and happy mum wasn't making her stay out in the rain any longer. I picked up my phone and called my aunt, asking her if my uncle had been out in the field with the cows. She said no, and I explained to her what had just happened to me. She sent my uncle over to the pasture to check it out, but soon after told me that he hadn't seen or heard anything. He said that he'd check the pasture again in the morning, but again, there was nothing. I spent my night hiding from the windows with the lights and the TV on loud enough to not hear anything outside. The next morning, when my uncle checked on the pasture, he didn't see anything out there, but what he did find was 2 calves that were dead. That explains the colossal cow panic that had ensued the night before. I regret this, but I didn't push for any more information, as I honestly just didn't want to know, but they told me other than that they didn't find anything out of the ordinary. A few months after that, and I started going to therapy for the paranoia that this had caused me. I started feeling like people were watching me, out to get me. Another few months after that, I moved out of the province for good, and finally felt safe. I'm wondering though if any of you here have any idea of what the heck this could have been. There's no chance that there would have been someone out in our field, as we were fairly far away from town and neighbors, and we have cameras that would have seen anyone enter our property. Coyotes are common, like I said, but I don't think they have a capability of mimicking words. So, do you have any ideas? Since moving, I've had some weird related things happen as well, but I'll save that for another time if you guys want to hear it. But thank you to anyone who can contribute to this, and thanks for hearing me out. To give some context, I used to be a 911 dispatcher for a small city. We dispatched all law, fire, EMS for the entire county, and within this county were multiple law agencies. I had been there for about 3 months or so when I met him. His name was Jake. Jake had recently transferred from a big department in California and landed himself randomly at our department. It didn't make much sense as to why he left California in the first place, but he always insisted that it was just time for him to move out to a smaller, less dangerous department. Him and I quickly became close and would chat almost every day after I got off shift. Within a few months, it became apparent that we liked each other, and our flirting progressed into something more serious. Fast forward a few months later, and it turns out that he was doing some inappropriate things to photos or videos of me whilst he was actively on duty. This and a few other things that he had kept hidden on duty led to him losing his license and leaving. During the process of his termination, his sergeant had suggested that I get a protective order against him, as he had apparently made threatening statements previously towards me, such as, "You better be telling the truth, I'll find out on Tuesday if you're lying to me," etc. I had begun to fill out the paperwork and was told that I had a temporary protective order on him in the meantime, but don't think that I ever actually did. Anyway, about 2 weeks later after his termination, he calls me to catch up. The entire call is like an old friend to an old friend. What am I doing for work? Do I have a boyfriend now? But progressively turns more personal. When does my shift end? What do I drive? Being 18 and naive, I treated him like I always had, answering his questions. I had contacted his old department afterwards, as his sergeant had told me to let him know if I was ever contacted again, but they turned me away pretty quickly and didn't want anything to do with it. So with that, I blocked Jake. Roughly a month later, I get a call from a new number and it's Jake. Once again, he wants to meet up and catch up, but this time he so casually goes on to tell me about this new house that he's wanting to buy in my neighborhood, knowing that it's my neighborhood. I had never told him where I'd lived in town, let alone what specific neighborhood I lived in. During this call, he progressively got more aggressive as well, making statements such as, "If I knew that I was going to get canned, I should have just had my way with you." He half-heartedly joked about getting a hotel room just for me, and, well, that was that. A few days later, he FaceTimed me and once again came off as simply wanting to catch up as he was sick. Midway through our seemingly normal conversation, he makes it apparent that he's been touching himself this entire time. Keep in mind, nothing suggestive was mentioned, and our conversation at that point was about his new dog. He's blocked once again, but has tried to follow my social media, and now I've started to see him in my area too. Last I knew, he lived nearly 30 to 45 minutes in the opposite direction from me. So, my question for all of you guys is, am I just reading into this, or should I genuinely consider this stalking, and if so, what should I do? About 6 months ago, a group of friends of mine came to my parents' house for my birthday for a few days. This was right after our college semester had just ended. One night we decided to hang out at the pool in my neighborhood too. I live in a gated community and there's a community pool in there. It was pretty late at night, around 2 or 3 in the morning. Now, over the course of time that we were there, I began to notice shadows moving around in my peripheral vision, and at times, the sound of footsteps running behind me. I live in Florida, so I assumed it was just iguanas or some other sort of wildlife that might be around. However, within an hour or so, I continued seeing shadows and hearing strange noises all around me. They would be gone just as quick as I would notice them. Eventually, I mentioned it to one of my friends with me that I was seeing and hearing things and thought I was going crazy. He said, "Dude, you aren't crazy because I've been seeing and hearing the same stuff too. I just didn't want to say anything." I asked the rest of my friends and some of them didn't notice anything, but others had sworn that they saw shadows moving in the distance. All of us described the same sort of eerie feeling as well, like as if we weren't the only ones there. But we were. It was late at night and we had been there alone for hours at this point. Then one of my friends spoke up and he had told me that he talked to my dad earlier and that my dad had recently found out that our neighborhood was built on an ancient Native American burial ground. My parents, they had moved to this neighborhood while I'd been in college, so this was news to me. Also, I'm personally not religious at all and I don't really believe in paranormal activity or anything. I've never believed in ghosts and certainly never thought I'd seen a spirit or anything. But now, I could have sworn that I was seeing things. Sure enough, too, I looked up the history of my neighborhood location and hundreds of human remains were found in a sacred burial mound on the land. It was discovered in the early 1900s, just thought to be a mound of sand. After remains were discovered, the land was bought by an archaeological enthusiast who eventually turned the mound into some sort of amusement park where people could walk through a tunnel and view the remains of Native Americans from like 800 years ago. There were even tigers and lions on the land too, with dozens of exotic animals that were attractions in the amusement park. Eventually though, this park fell out, and in the 80s, it was expected to be purchased by the county as a historical preservation or whatever. However, it was bought out by the current owners of my gated community that exists today. There are dozens of condos and houses built all over the land, and the actual mound is still there today, covered with grass and trees. And to this day, I still get the same eerie feeling when I pass by that mound in my neighborhood, because I always thought that it was just a man-made hill or a decoration or whatever. But it's not. And guess where it sits? Yeah, right next to the pool. At 4 a.m. tonight, we got back from our walk. We live in Poland, pretty much on the Czech border, and usually take a late walk. Around 2 a.m. we took our off-road vehicle into a nearby forest that we've been in many times. We parked the car and walked across a bridge to a spot that we visited in the daytime. I should also mention that there's two separate sides of this forest. We walked deeper into the woods. Surrounding us are mounds, which I think are old war trenches, based on the area's history and items that we found there before. The ground is full of dead leaves, so you could hear any movement, especially this night because the woods were completely silent. All of the grassy plants or shrubs on the ground around us looked like they'd been recently crushed, not cut down, and all facing the same direction, which was a little bit weird. It was honestly like a herd of buffalo came from on top of the mounds and just ran down and trampled them all. I assume deer did this, but as we were walking closer to the mounds to venture upwards, all of a sudden we hear this heavy thud on the ground, like a weight, maybe 60 kilos, landed approximately 5 meters away from us, closer to the mounds. We didn't see anything or hear any other movement, which was strange. So we decide that this is the time to leave. The bridge is about 20 meters away. I'm trying to move quickly. My partner is clapping and shouting in case it's a wild boar. When we get to the bridge, we're still on the same side before crossing back to the vehicle. We both stop and shine our flashlights at the forest to see if there's something there. We don't see or hear anything. But about 30 seconds later, we begin to cross the bridge, still with our flashlights pointed at the forest. But now, in a bush about 3 meters away, are two sets of round yellow eyes staring at us. The first set of eyes is maybe, I don't know, like 1.5 to 2 meters from the ground, and the other set is about 1 meter from the ground. Even though we had just shined our flashlights in that exact spot, and were still in earshot of this bush, we didn't hear anything moving there. You can't even take one step there without the leaves going crunch though, so that was definitely strange. The only thing that we actually heard was the sound of the initial thud, so how did this thing move so quickly towards us without making any noise? We walked the rest of the bridge backwards while shining lights at this bush. The whole time these eyes were watching us as well. We then jumped into the vehicle and we got the heck out of there. Luckily, it didn't follow us, and whatever this was stopped, stared, and just stayed behind the bushes on the other side of the bridge. I can't tell if it was after us or if it was making sure that we left its side of the bridge or something. Initially, I thought that it was a wild boar, but I've seen them many times in my life, even at night, and these eyes didn't look the same. Plus, there was the actual size of the thing. Whatever it was huge. I really don't know how else to explain this, and there's just no other large creatures like that in this area. We will go back tomorrow in the daytime to see if there's any animal prints near that bush. But in the meantime, do you guys have any ideas as to what this could be? This incident took place in the summer of 2023. Last year, I transferred with my company to take a new position in a major Midwestern city. My spouse was still working and living back in California for the next few months, so I rented a studio apartment for myself in a newly renovated apartment building in a popular downtown neighborhood until we could look for a place together. The apartment was small, but it was nice. It was in a secure building with interior hallways and a nice downstairs lobby. I was one of the first tenants to move into this newly renovated building, and other new residences soon started moving in too. A major advantage of this move was that I'd only be a couple of hours' drive from my hometown and my parents as well. I started my new job and everything was going great. I was enjoying my new neighborhood, and the neighbors in the apartment building generally kept to themselves, like I did. Then, a new guy moved in across the hall, and everything changed. David was a single man in his 60s and was very different from the college students and young professionals who lived in our building. I started noticing his erratic behavior almost immediately. I would come home from work and he would be sitting in his car in a small parking lot just sort of staring off in the distance. We were having issues that summer with smoke clouds coming over from the vast Canadian wildfires. They were leaving a light dusting of ash on our cars similar to pollen. David, though, was convinced that someone was spraying this dust on his car and was accusing various tenants that he would run into in the parking lot. He would hoard trash in his apartment and leave trash bags in the hallway, causing a foul odor. He would also be yelling to himself in the hallway. I finally had enough and I complained to the leasing office. The manager was quick to dismiss my concerns, saying that she'd been in this apartment and everything was apparently fine. In August, though, my parents' 50th anniversary was coming up and I was excited to go home and spend a weekend with them. A few days before their anniversary, my boss informed me that he would be flying into work on an important project with me that would have us working throughout the weekend. I was really disappointed and I felt like I was letting my parents down, but I managed to get away for a quick overnight trip in the middle of the week to see them and get back before my boss was due to arrive. I drove down and I spent the night with them, and the next morning I checked my email as I was getting ready to head back. There was an email from my apartment manager in regard to the incident the night before. The email was very vague, but it stated that a resident was dead, and there would be further details coming later. My heart sank, and I immediately went pale. My mind instinctively went to my strange neighbor, David. I opened up a local news app for my city, and the top story was an active shooter in my apartment building who was killed during a SWAT team standoff the night before. Apparently, David approached my next-door neighbor in the hallway with a gun and threatened to shoot him. The neighbor ran into his apartment and called 911. David also called 911 and told the dispatcher that his neighbors were hacking his phone, and if the police didn't come, he was going to start shooting people. The police came and tried to talk to David, but he had barricaded himself in his apartment and claimed to be heavily armed. The state police and the SWAT team soon arrived, and David began firing a rifle out of his window at anyone that he saw in the parking lot below. All of the neighbors on my floor were trapped in their apartments with no way of escape. They had to get down and barricade themselves from the gunfire. There was another building across the street with a direct line of sight into our apartment building. A police sniper took position in the building across the street and shot David through his window. When they flew a drone into his open window and confirmed that he was dead with a gun still in his hand, they went in. Luckily, nobody else was injured. I got home later that day to a bullet-riddled apartment building, and several neighbors who normally didn't speak to each other were hugging and crying and showing each other videos of the incident from their hiding places. I've never been so lucky to have been out of town. If my boss hadn't have messed up my plans, I would have been home that night, and who knows what would have happened. I'm sorry David didn't get the mental health attention that he needed, honestly, but He put so many lives in danger, and I'm just really glad that I wasn't there. This event happened to me and a friend from out of town that I had invited to go hunting one afternoon. This location was in South Louisiana, in an area thick with woods and a lot of palmetto, up to 6 foot in height, in some places, and the water that we had to walk into to get to my deer stands were at least up to our waist at times, so it was slow moving in the mile that we had to walk to our deer stands, and my friend wasn't used to this tough terrain, but he kept up, and when I got to the first stand, which was about 15 feet off of the ground, with a ladder to climb up, once he was up, I told him that I would be by to pick him up in about half an hour after dark, since I was about a half mile past him. It was a full moon that was reflecting off of the water, allowing us to hunt a few minutes longer, and when it became too dark to see, I climbed down from my deer stand with my rifle on my shoulder, and I started walking slowly towards my friend to pick him up. And when I was almost to his stand, I shine my light up, and he just wasn't in the stand. So I shine my light on the ground at the bottom of the stand, and there he was, leaning back against the tree that the stand was on. And what was odd was that he wouldn't look my way, even after me calling his name. So I walked up to him within a couple of feet and asked if he was ready to go. And that's when he finally turned his head and looked towards me. And what I saw in his face scared me so bad that I took my rifle off of my shoulder, putting it between me and him. His eyes were rolled back in his head, and his mouth was wide open, just standing there looking at me, not saying a word, and he wasn't answering me either. I was asking him what the heck he was doing and what was wrong, but he wouldn't answer me. So there I was, a mile or so back in the woods with solid palmettos all around us, and up to my waist in water, with my good friend looking at me as if he was possessed or something. And yes, at this point, I was scared. So eventually I finally slapped him in the face, and he seemed to snap back to himself. I then asked if he was okay, and his only words to me were, "Let's get out of here now." So, with me not knowing what the heck was going on, I made him walk in front of me the whole way back to the truck, and we get on in and we left without saying a word. Eventually I asked him what happened in the woods. Why did he look so shocked or possessed like that? He started crying, and then he started telling me about how apparently he was sitting there in the stand when he heard something coming through the water, moving palmettos as if it was walking. And when it got close enough to see what it was, he said that it was a man that apparently looked like he had been skinned alive, like he had no skin at all on him. And he said that he was so scared that after this thing had passed him, he climbed down and hid under the stand against the tree so that it wouldn't see him if it came back. He was in shock, and when I got to him, that's why he had looked like he did apparently. He was so shook up and crying that eventually I had to tell him to pull over so that I could drive. Well, a week went by and I was talking to my little cousin who had gone out on tour at a near Indian memorial, and they were explaining how this Indian tribe would skin men of their tribe alive and turn them loose in the woods when they had committed a serious crime in the tribe. And my friend who had witnessed this skinned man a week earlier wasn't from around this area and had no way of knowing this, so what did he see that put him in shock like that? Was it a ghost of one of these Indians who was skinned alive years ago? I don't know, but I just know that the shape my friend was in when I got to him that night in the woods is something that I will never forget. I've been asked many times now in responses and conversations all over the place to share my experiences as an Order of St. John Chaplain and Demonologist. It's hard to know where to start, to be honest, but the most important thing that I think is to say that these are my beliefs and experiences. I certainly don't begrudge you yours, and definitely don't want to assert any kind of authority over the beliefs of others. As chaplains, we are not positioned within a church because we minister to communities. It really isn't our place to judge any member of that community, but only to care for and support them in their needs. Also, rule number 1 of the job is to disprove, and disprove again. Other than that, to save you the trouble, I'll share things in order of how much interest that I think that they get. I'll begin with experiences, then some insight into our processes, what I'm allowed to speak to anyway, how I got into the field, and then the training that I undertook. So, my experiences are this. General and passive paranormal experiences are part and parcel of the job. I'll touch on it more later, but I'm not afraid of things that go bump in the night. I used to be, but once you've studied and understand it, the paranormal loses its excitement and becomes more of a puzzle that needs to be solved. My passive experiences are things like every month or so I'll have some new knocking on our doors and windows, even though we live in a secure 3rd-floor apartment. I get random prods and pokes when I'm by myself, whispering, murmuring, growling, scratching, electrical interference, random mists, distorted shadows and shadow figures here and there. This has all become weekly occurrence, although when I say that it's usually just one of these things that happens, I deal with it, and it goes away almost immediately. But this is probably my most fascinating one, because it's a reoccurring event that happens every couple of months, and I haven't yet solved the puzzle. You see, I travel a lot for my role, and at the moment I've been sent to one of our small towns to train people, run mental health programs, or help with large-scale crisis responses. This results in my driving for long hours, sometimes during the day and sometimes at night. And I will see the same stocky hitchhiking figure walking along the side of the road in a black hoodie and jeans, with hood up, thumb out. I've never stopped, mind you, and he's never turned around when I've approached. I've seen him at every point in the day, dawn, day, dusk, night. I've seen him in locations several hours drive from each location as well. At first, I honestly thought that it was just a coincidence, but hitchhiking is really uncommon in our country. We're small and buses are really cheap, so to see this guy like that in so many different locations, something is definitely up. The next one, this is another reoccurring one, although it's newer. It's more annoying than anything else, to be honest, but several times my partner and I have been woken to a long howl in our bedroom. Our windows are closed, apartment unit like I said, but it's ruining my sleep and I really enjoy my sleep, so this one is annoying. The next one, I'm actually thankful that it's resolved, but I had to deal with it over a series of years. To cut a long story short, whenever I was in the middle of a really tough case supporting someone in what we call spiritual warfare, I'd get a visit from whatever this was. It was the same every time, where I would have a dream of a cloaked figure, wake up to a spinning room, and I would be choking. I've had sleep paralysis episodes before, but this was definitely different. I'm still half convinced that this was some kind of sleep apnea issue or episode. The only thing that makes me think that it was paranormal is because it happened without fail when I dreamt of this figure, and it stopped after I put some intentional work into stopping it. There are also some experiences of clients that unfortunately I cannot share because I've made a strict confidentiality agreement with them, and that rests on my soul, but generally speaking, I've helped people deal with their psychological issues more than spiritual. Some spiritual ones have been fascinating, and there's a feeling that I get when there's a real obvious sign of oppression or infestation. It's sort of like a heavy feeling on my chest, and stuffy air, sort of. I've helped people by blessing their houses, which is a complicated process, and depending on your beliefs can be somewhat risky. You essentially have to call forth the oppressing force, challenge it, rebuke it, and either condemn it or suppress it, if it can't be dealt with in one blessing. I've also helped people with deliverance, although I'm not really big on the evangelical deliverance ministry. We're a more traditional denomination. But I've never helped with an exorcism. I'm still relatively young for my role, and while I am a commissioned member of the order, I'm not yet a fully fledged ordained minister or anything. So, now to our processes. We have to be careful with what we share, and that's for a really inane reason. We often get people who either want to play a prank or desperately want something paranormal to be happening, and the information that we don't share is essentially the key information that we need while triaging our cases. What I can say though is how we view the paranormal is unusual. Anything paranormal, by our theology, is demonological, angelic, or the Holy Spirit. When it comes to things that we humans get scared of, well, we're sort of hardwired to be scared of the paranormal if we believe in it. It's an non-interactable nocturnal threat, and it's really easy to trigger our limbic system. However, and again, just my view, I see paranormal activity as parlor tricks of a damned and jealous entity, but I have the power to send it back where it belongs, and it knows that, so it will struggle however it can. It will try and scare me because it is scared of me, and really it should be because I'm there to do a job. It's sort of like a spiritual pest extermination, I guess, but a moving cup, whispering, growling, etc., is nowhere as scary to me as, say, driving in heavy rain or the things that I've dealt with as a bouncer while I studied. Humans, dogs, even cats are more dangerous than most hauntings or paranormal experiences. One exception, though, is that possession is incredibly dangerous, but insanely rare too. I'm not scared of these things, not because I'm tougher or brave or anything, but because they're not really actually that dangerous, and they need to be condemned. That being said, if we go through an intensive investigatory sort of process, it looks a bit like this. So we're a medical order, we're also an indigenously focused arm of the order, and our perspective gives us a different worldview. When we assess a person, we don't just look at their spiritual health, we look at their social, physical, and psychological health as well. The first thing that we will do, fully funded, is have the person see a doctor and a psychologist for assessment. This isn't because we think that they're crazy, it's because we're building a comprehensive profile for exactly what we're dealing with. If someone is positive for physical or mental health issues that could be causing symptoms that they believe are spiritual, we need to treat those issues and see if the symptoms go away. Our church fully covers any costs associated with this process too. And if that doesn't solve the problem, my job is to definitively disprove the existence of paranormal activity or presences, but to do so while believing that there may still well be a presence. Skepticism is a good thing most of the time, but it's sometimes bad, I know that. We're not there to assume the issue is mundane. We take all the information that we can, assess it, and arrive at the likely outcomes. And we consider spiritual outcomes to be similar as likely as mundane ones. However, we still need to disprove all of the mundane theories that we can. But there's another layer to this, you see, because we also need to prove all of the mundane theories too. This helps us have equality of information, so we won't be happy to say, oh, it's probably just this mundane thing, unless we can prove that. After this, if there is persistence of a spiritual issue, we begin our church-sanctified process of blessings and protections for the affected individual. These interventions vary on intensity dependent on the person, their faith relationship, and the persistence of whatever that we're dealing with. I didn't take a standard pathway to this either. A standard pathway is that you attend a church that believes in demonological study, get as involved as possible with whatever you can, talk to the pastor about your desire to study and follow this pathway, and see if the church will support you. It's a long pathway though. You can also try to become a sort of lay chaplain for certain denominations, but honestly, the best thing that you can do is wholeheartedly commit to a church, show them that you're willing, and they'll support your journey. My pathway was that I studied a youth psych degree and specialized in youth gangs. Then a church was investing into the community and looking for a Christian with my expertise to be their youth pastor. I worked there for some time, and after a bit of a journey came back to my home denomination, and that's who I work for now. I got a master's in professional practice, chaplaincy, and a diploma in demonology. But my psychology knowledge is what sets me apart for this ministry in the eyes of the church. I'm much more equipped to do a referral assessment than many of the clergy or congregation. My training in demonology comes from several sources. I completed the diploma at Bible College, but have also done a small amount of training under a course from Bishop James Long. I did the Paranormal Academy of the United Kingdom online course because it's not Christian, and I trained under our Archbishop for some time to specifically respond to the needs of the community in this regard. As a chaplain, this calling fit under my purview in his eyes, and when I need to escalate church involvement, I go straight to him. He taught me our beliefs, blessings, the process of our church, etc. He also taught me our church's stance on demonology, which is really old school. We're Anglican, King James was a demonologist, so it's a particular field for us. And that's pretty much it. I'm always open to helping people on here, so if you have trouble, please just reach out through a message. I'm also happy to answer questions and engage in a discourse, although I'm not going to be entirely engaging in what-ifs from the stories. For me, it's almost impossible to prove the paranormal online due to the nature of evidence and how easily it can be faked. So I'm not going to get into that. And I've peer-reviewed these things with my colleagues, so to me, I'm satisfied. But before finishing, I would like to offer a couple of more stories. So after I started to get more involved in spiritual guidance and conflict and intervention, we started noticing more stuff happening around the house. One thing that came to visit was a large dark figure. They were about 8 foot tall. I'm 6'4", so tall in my own regard, but this thing was huge. It was coming from an underground storage next to our room. We were staying in a basement. After getting involved in a particularly nasty case, things started with knocking on the door from the underground storage area. Once a day at random times, we would hear a simple sort of knock 3 times. The area was a brick-walled room with dirt floors though, but there was no external access by either wind or people. We largely ignored it, and when the knock happened, if I was there, I would rebuke whatever was knocking by letting it know that it wasn't welcome. My partner, however, opened the door after the knocking but didn't tell me. She's not as spiritual as I am, and she was curious to figure out what the knocking was. The next day, we were relaxing in bed when the guitar standing next to the door strummed twice incredibly loudly. Again, I rebuked, but again, I didn't know that she'd answered the door. That night, I was struggling to fall asleep. I was tossing and turning, and was frustrated, so I opened my eyes to go to my phone. And when I did, roughly 20 feet away, I saw a huge black shadow figure standing in the corner looking at us. It was well built, with broad shoulders and a strong-looking body. I was frozen with shock at first, and then I flashed my phone screen in its direction. It didn't disappear immediately though, which shocked me, to be honest, but sort of slowly dissipated from the bottom upwards. I prayed an incantation and I went back to sleep. The next night, though, was the same. I struggled to sleep and had a feeling, and when I was almost asleep, I opened my eyes, and again, there was the figure, except this time it was standing next to the door to the underground area. I grabbed my blessed tire, it's a Maori weapon, and stood, then started to perform a fairly serious prayer. This half woke my partner up. This matters soon too, and as I prayed in the darkness, the same thing happened. The figure slowly disappeared. The next day my partner asked what I was doing, and I told her. I then asked her if she had seen anything, and she said that she'd been hearing the knocking and tried to find the source. I asked her if she'd opened the door after knocking, and she said yes. So I finally did what I should have, but was probably too scared to at the time in case I picked a fight that I couldn't win. I was new to all of this at the time, and blessed both our room and the storage room. I used frankincense and myrrh incense, holy water, and prayers in English, Latin, and my native Maori language. I placed an iron cross above the door on the inside of the house, and placed bigger wooden crosses above all of the entry points to my room, including that one. And, thankfully, I've had no problems since, and have gained a heck of a lot more confidence due to a lot more exposure. To this day, though, I'm not 100% sure what I was dealing with at that point. So, to be honest, I would really like to hear if anybody else has had experiences like this, to try and gain some more information and perspective on perhaps what it could have been. So I shared something about some howling at night and early morning too, not too long ago, and also said that I'd been thinking about skinwalkers, and I'd also been reading about them lately. Well, tonight, I was outside with my cousin helping him set up his new basketball hoop. We got finished with it and he was shooting some hoops while I was watching, and it's about dusk at this point. Then he asks me if I want to go inside, and I say sure, and then all of a sudden I hear, "Help me, please help me, someone help." It sounded like a little girl crying for help near our pond. I was a bit shaken by that, and my cousin had already went inside the door but was waiting for me. At this point, I'm shaking because it's almost like I knew what it was as soon as I heard it. My cousin came back out and I no longer heard it. Then I'm shaking my way back inside to tell my fiancée, and she looks out the bathroom window because it's looking out towards the pond, and she sees a little girl out there. Then she tells me to come look. Not even 10 seconds later, and not even 10 seconds later when I get there, there's nothing there. What the heck is happening though? First it was knocking and howling, but we're having actual experiences now, and I'm seriously starting to worry. Obviously, I checked for any sign of an actual little girl, and there was no sign of anyone out there. It wasn't a real little girl, of that I'm sure, and I know that it wasn't. I know who lives around this area, in fact, and I know what happens around here. It's not just some distressed kid. I know that. But I've been reading up on skinwalkers and also thinking about them. I'm about 60% native and also just had a child. Lots of negative things are going on in the family right now. It's pretty chaotic and it's feeding off of these things, I think. Also, by the time that I got out there, there's no way that she would have fallen in the pond. And there was just no sign of anyone there anyway. There was no splashing in the water, no ripples, and also when I checked it this morning, there were no footprints or hair or shoes or clothes or anything either. It was muddy enough to see if someone had been there last night too. And I think I'm going to start to try and catch this stuff on camera to document it because obviously something weird is going on. So I've told my friends and family this story and they just look at me like I'm crazy. I also ended up telling my wife when we were moving out of the house that this happened in. I lived in Nevada with my wife in a newly constructed house that was 3 floors. The master bedroom was on the 3rd floor, and there was no door up to the master floor, it was just open. Sort of like a loft, but it was a full-sized area, not a converted attic or anything. This is pretty common in Nevada, so that they can squeeze as many thin, taller houses in a lot as possible. But anyway, one night, about a month into moving into the house, we're both asleep. I wake up in the middle of the night at around 2 or 4ish and see all the way at the other side of the room what I can only describe as like a little creature, all black, and I couldn't make out any features or eyes or anything, but whatever it was small. Maybe 2 feet tall, I would guess, and had 2 arms and legs like a person, but was sort of wider and didn't move like a person. It was unnaturally fast. It ran quickly to the edge of the bed, and then I could tell that it was looking right at me. I couldn't move, and I very consciously remember thinking, oh no, I do not have time for this. I remember it peered over the mattress and had a longer nose, but for some reason, it was not able or allowed to get on the bed or something. I watched it for about 10 seconds, then was like, okay, if it can't get up, then I'm just going to roll over. So I rolled over and nothing else happened that night. I know that ending is pretty anticlimactic, but that's what happened to me that night. I never saw anything in that house again except for that one night. I was definitely awake and I could move, so it wasn't sleep paralysis. I've had that once, and this was much worse and way more terrifying. And I guess I'm just wondering if there's a name for what I saw, or if anybody else has had anything similar happen to them and what it was. So this happened to me in my early teens. I'm 21 now, and my best friend growing up had this huge farmhouse in the middle of Virginia. It was really old and beautiful, but also had a very dark history. In the house, there's a tunnel that leads to an underground room of sorts that was used for slaves to hide in the 1800s. And I'm 90% sure that some actually died down there while in hiding, so you can imagine the history and the energy that fills this house. I always felt scared there too. I never felt alone and wouldn't go anywhere alone in the house, even just to grab something out of my room. The room that I was staying in, obviously. Even the family was scared to stay there with no company because of the intense apparitions and also experiences, which I can get into another day. The rooms, though, were massive, and the entire house was white with, honestly, a sort of creepy vintage decor. And there was even a cabinet of ventriloquist dolls upstairs. No, I'm not joking. They were a really old family, honestly, with lots of dark problems, but anyways, the second time that I visited that house, I was with my mum, my best friend at the time, and her mum. It was a girls' trip. One night, I woke up and was so thirsty, and the last thing that I wanted to do was go downstairs and get water. I mean, I was terrified like everyone else. I hated that house at night, but my mum was pretty much dead asleep, so I literally sprinted downstairs with my head only looking at the floor. I made my water in 5 seconds, and when I made it to the stairs, something compelled me to look at the giant glass doors that were in front of the stairs. I was horrified, but I don't know, I just felt like I needed to look at the window. What I saw, too, when I looked at the window will haunt me for the rest of my life, because I saw a man, as real as anybody else that I'd ever seen before, standing there. It was pitch black outside with a huge bright moon. The man was all black like a silhouette, but because of the moon being so bright, I could clearly see his entire body. He was blacker than black, like he stood out so much that I 100% thought that he was a trespasser. He was wearing a top hat and was unhumanly tall, like well over 7 feet. My heart literally felt like it stopped beating, and for a moment I felt like I was in a trance of sorts. I was so unexpectedly horrified, but I couldn't look away. He was also moving a little bit, almost like breathing, I think. Then, about 10 seconds later, he was gone, disappearing into seemingly thin air. Well, I absolutely panicked and bolted upstairs after I snapped out of my trance, that is. I cried to my mum and was up all night, and I didn't get a wink of sleep after that. The next morning, I told my friend and her mum about the experience, and they were not shocked at all. As they had seen multiple full-body apparitions in the house themselves, they didn't seem to be fussed by it. I found out later too that the nanny that worked for them even refused to go into some rooms of the house after her own experiences. But after that, I never went back to that house ever again. This experience happened a while back, but I thought that I might as well share it on here for you guys to hear. So, back in the mid-2000s, I lived in this house with my dad, my mum and my sister. Across the road from this house was this massive mansion which had a lot of residential turnover which my family, me included, believes is cursed. My sister and I were kind of scared of it, to be honest, because it was this big, dark house that felt uninviting and cold. When my family moved into our house, there was a wealthy businessman living in the mansion across the road who moved in a few months before us. This guy was really rich, like think luxury cars, massive dinner parties with his rich friends, etc. Apparently, he owned a bunch of businesses, started a new business shortly after we moved in, and after almost 6 months of starting this business, he went bankrupt. He apparently lost everything. He sold all of his luxury cars, he had no more dinner parties, and he also quickly became an alcoholic. He ended up selling his house because he of course couldn't afford it. But after he sold the house, a young, recently married couple moved in. I have no idea how they afforded the house, but Nonetheless, they moved in and settled in quickly. My parents actually became quite good friends with them, and we would have them over for dinner occasionally. They stayed in the house for about 2 years, but within that 2 years, they had 3 miscarriages. The wife ended up becoming depressed and even had to be committed to a psych ward because she was thinking about deleting herself. These 2 incidences could be just classified as bad luck, I know that. Perhaps unfortunate events, but the third one, in my opinion, solidifies that this house is cursed. So another couple moved into the house after the other couple decided to move, and this couple were pretty wealthy. They hired a maid to stay in the house and to assist them with cooking and cleaning, etc. After a year of them living there, we once again got pretty close to this couple and would sometimes have them for dinner too, and swim in the pool that they had as well. One night, my dad woke up and had a strange feeling. Apparently, he heard something outside, so looked out of his bedroom window and saw the maid packing her car in the middle of the night. The couple that was living there was apparently away for the weekend, and the maid was staying at the house by herself. He thought that it was weird and was a bit concerned, but didn't think too much of it and went back to sleep. After he went back to sleep, he had a terrible nightmare that the maid ended up ending her own life in the garage of the house. He woke up in the morning a bit shaken from this dream and had a sort of sixth sense feeling. He decided to go over there and check if everything was okay. He rang the doorbell but didn't get an answer, so he decided to go around to the back of the house to see if the back door was unlocked. The back door was unlocked, so he went in. He entered the living room and, sure enough, his dream had come true. He instantly ran home and called the police and ambulance, but by the time that they got there, and by that point, it was too late. I remember seeing my dad after the event, and he was as white as a ghost. Of course, he didn't tell us what had happened as we were only young. He ended up telling us when I was about maybe 15 or 16 or something, and I don't really bring it up to him because he hates talking about it and gets really upset about the whole thing. We moved a little bit after the last event happened. I still have no idea what happened to the next family that moved in, but I seriously hope that nothing bad happened to them. To this day, though, I am convinced that that mansion is cursed.